The Woman Who Stayed. The train screeched into Clarkston on a brutal August afternoon in 1878, and Evelyn Moore stepped onto a platform that looked like hope had died there years ago. 6 women before her had answered Caleb Hart's notice. 6 had quit within weeks. Now she stood facing a crowd of well-dressed candidates who laughed at her threadbare dress and hollow cheeks. "That one won't last 3 days," someone whispered. Evelyn's hands trembled, but her feet stayed planted. Behind the exhausted rancher sat 3 hollow-eyed children who'd learned not to hope anymore. She wasn't looking at them. She was looking at them. Before we begin, I invite you to join Evelyn's journey to the very end. If this story touches your heart, please hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let's step back to that dusty platform where everything changed. The platform splintered beneath Evelyn's worn boots as she steadied herself against the Montana wind. Clarkston spread before her like a broken promise, buildings sagging under their own weight, dust devils spinning through empty streets, windows dark, even in broad daylight. This wasn't the thriving frontier town the recruitment notice had described. This was a place where dreams came to surrender. 3 other women stood near the station office, their traveling dresses crisp despite the journey, their luggage fine leather that spoke of families with means. Evelyn clutched her single cloth bag tighter, feeling the weight of their stares like stones. She'd sewn her best dress from flour sacks 2 months ago, carefully picking out every logo until her fingers bled. It still looked exactly like what it was. "Is that all she brought?" The tallest woman, auburn hair perfectly pinned beneath a feathered hat, didn't bother lowering her voice. "Poor thing looks half-starved. Probably desperate." Another woman, blonde with cold blue eyes, adjusted her parasol. The notice did say, "No questions asked about circumstances." That's code for, "We'll take anyone." The third woman, older with kind eyes that didn't match her companions', caught Evelyn's gaze and offered a small, apologetic smile. Evelyn looked away. Pity hurt worse than contempt. A wagon rattled toward the platform, pulled by 2 horses that looked as exhausted as everything else in this town. The man driving barely qualified as present. His body occupied the seat, but his attention lived somewhere far away. Caleb Hart, the notice had said. Widowed rancher, 3 children, seeking household help. Good pay for the right woman. 6 women had already tried. 6 had failed. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop with the mechanical precision of someone who'd forgotten why movements mattered. He was perhaps 35, maybe younger. Grief had a way of aging a man beyond his years. Dust coated his dark hair, his beard needed trimming, and his shirt had been mended so many times the original fabric seemed more memory than material. But his hands on the reins were steady, and his shoulders carried weight without complaint. "Ladies," his voice came out rough, underused. "I'm Caleb Hart. Thank you for coming." The 3 well-dressed women moved forward immediately. Evelyn hung back, her attention snagged by what Caleb clearly hoped no one would notice. 3 small faces peering around the wagon's canvas cover. The eldest, a girl of perhaps 10, had eyes older than her father's. She held a boy of maybe 5 against her side with fierce protectiveness, one hand pressed over his mouth as if silence had become their family's native language. A third child, a girl barely 3, clung to the older girl's skirt with both fists, her face buried against fabric worn soft from washing. They weren't just watching the proceedings. They were braced for another disappointment. The notice mentioned room and board plus $20 monthly, the auburn-haired woman said, her tone businesslike. "I'll require 25, given the remote location and additional children." Caleb's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "The amount stated was 30 for me," the blonde interrupted. "And Sunday's completely free. No work, no children, no exceptions." "I don't think you understand the situation," Caleb tried again. "Oh, we understand perfectly." The older woman's kind eyes had turned calculating. 6 women have quit already. You're desperate. That changes the negotiation significantly." Evelyn watched Caleb's hands tighten on the reins. The horses shifted, sensing tension. Behind him, the eldest daughter pulled both younger children deeper into the wagon's shadows. "The terms in the notice stand," Caleb said quietly. $20 monthly, room and board. Sundays off after morning chores are complete. The work is hard. The children are He stopped, and something cracked in his voice. The children need consistency. Then you should have offered competitive wages. The blonde snapped her parasol shut. I have 3 other offers waiting. 2 of them are in actual towns with actual society. She turned on her heel, skirt swishing with performative indignation. The auburn-haired woman followed without a word. The older woman hesitated, glancing between Caleb and Evelyn. The position requires someone strong, she said finally, not unkindly. Someone who can handle physical labor, difficult children, isolation. I have grandchildren of my own waiting in Oregon. I thought... She shook her head. This situation requires more than I can offer. I'm sorry. She left more gently than the others, but she still left. Caleb sat motionless on the wagon seat, staring at nothing. The defeat in his shoulders told Evelyn this scene had played out before, probably with only minor variations. He'd placed the notice. Women came. Women saw the reality, the dying town, the broken children, the weight of it all, and women left. The smart thing, the sensible thing, would be to follow them. Evelyn stepped forward instead. Mr. Hart? He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw the exact moment he registered what she was. Thin to the point of fragility, dress obviously homemade, no luggage worth mentioning, desperation written in every line of her frame. His expression closed like a door. You should take the afternoon train back, he said, not meanly. Just tired. You're not... He couldn't seem to finish any sentence that ended in rejection. The work's too hard. I can work hard. The children are difficult. Children usually are, when they're hurting. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, that she'd named what he'd been trying to hide. The ranch is isolated, miles from anywhere. No neighbors, no society, nothing. I'm not looking for society, Mr. Hart. I'm looking for work. Why? The question came out sharp, suspicion cutting through exhaustion. Why would you want this? The others took one look and ran. He stopped himself, but they both knew what he'd almost said. You're too thin, too weak, too obviously desperate. Evelyn met his eyes steadily. Because 6 women have quit, which means you're running out of options and time. Because your children are listening to every word we're saying, learning that people leave. And because... She glanced at the wagon, at the 3 pairs of eyes watching from the shadows. Because someone needs to stay. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the wind rattling through Clarkston's skeleton. Caleb studied her with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable, weighing her words against whatever calculus of desperation and hope he'd been running. Finally, he nodded once. Wagon's full. You'll ride up front. Evelyn climbed onto the seat, setting her small bag at her feet. The canvas behind them rustled as the children repositioned themselves, trying to see without being seen. Caleb didn't speak as they rolled out of town. The silence felt deliberate, like he was giving her time to change her mind before they got too far. Every quarter mile seemed designed as a test. The road got rougher, the landscape emptier, the isolation more complete. Evelyn didn't ask to turn back. The ranch appeared after an hour's drive, shimmering in the heat like a mirage that might disappear if you looked away. It sprawled across a shallow valley, buildings clustered around a main house that had clearly known better days. Fences needed mending. The barn door hung crooked. The garden had gone wild, useful plants strangled by weeds that didn't know they weren't wanted. But the bones were good. Solid construction, thoughtful layout, evidence of care that had simply run out of energy to continue. Caleb pulled the wagon to a stop near the house and sat there, staring at his own front door like he wasn't sure he had the strength to go inside. Sarah, Thomas, Ruth, his voice gentled as he addressed the children. Come meet Miss Moore. The canvas parted slowly. The eldest, Sarah, emerged first, all sharp angles and defensive posture, positioning herself between her siblings and this new stranger. Thomas followed, his hand locked in Sarah's skirt, eyes fixed on the ground. Little Ruth wouldn't let go of Sarah at all, peering around her sister's hip with a face that had forgotten what trust looked like. Miss Moore will be staying to help around the house, Caleb said. I expect you to treat her with respect. Like we treated the others? Sarah's voice carried an edge that should have been years beyond her. Before they left too? Caleb flinched. Sarah, it's all right. Evelyn climbed down from the wagon, deliberately moving slowly, keeping her hands visible. She'd worked with frightened animals enough to recognize the same wariness in these children. You've got every right to be suspicious. 6 women before me, your father said. That's 6 people who promised to stay and didn't. That's 6 times you got your hopes up and had them crushed. Sarah's defenses cracked just enough to show surprise underneath. I can't promise I'm different, Evelyn continued. That'd be just words, and words are cheap. Only thing that matters is what I do. So I'm going to make you one promise, and it's the only one I'll make until I've earned the right to more. She looked at each child in turn, then back to Sarah. I promise that if I'm going to leave, I'll tell you first. Face to face. No disappearing in the night, no making your father explain why there's another empty place at breakfast. You've earned at least that much honesty. Sarah stared at her, clearly trying to decide if this was another adult lie dressed up in pretty words. Thomas had finally looked up, watching Evelyn with something that might become cautious interest. Ruth remained hidden. Can you cook? Sarah demanded. Yes. The last one burned everything. The one before that only made soup. Just soup. Every meal for 2 weeks. I can make more than soup. Can you sew? Thomas tore his only other shirt and father doesn't have time, and I'm not... Sarah's voice caught. I'm not good at it yet. I can sew. The little one cries. Sarah's chin came up, defensive and challenging. Every night, loud, for hours. Most of them couldn't handle it. Evelyn's chest tightened, but she kept her voice steady. What's her name? Ruth. How old? 3. She doesn't talk much anymore. She used to, before... Sarah stopped, loyalty warring with the desperate need to make this stranger understand the magnitude of the task. Before Mother died. The words hung in the air like gun smoke. Caleb turned away, shoulders rigid, finding something extremely important to attend to on the wagon harness. Evelyn crouched down slowly, bringing herself eye level with Ruth's hiding place. Hello, Ruth. My name's Evelyn. I bet you miss your mama something fierce. The little girl's eyes widened, peeking out further. My mama died too, Evelyn said softly. Long time ago. I was about Sarah's age. And you know what? I cried every night too. Couldn't help it. Missing someone that bad just has to come out somehow. Ruth's grip on Sarah's skirt loosened a fraction. If you need to cry tonight, that's all right by me. And if you need someone to sit with you while you do, I can do that too. No promises, I'll make it better. Can't nobody replace your mama. But I can promise you won't have to be alone with it. Something shifted in Sarah's face. A crack in armor forged too young from necessity. There's a room off the kitchen, Caleb said, his voice carefully controlled. That's your room. I'll show you. The house's interior matched its exterior, fundamentally sound, desperately neglected. Dust coated every surface. Dishes filled the dry sink in precarious towers. The main room held furniture arranged with careful thought now buried under life's accumulated debris. Children's drawings, broken toys, a woman's sewing basket that no one had been able to put away. Caleb led Evelyn through to a small room behind the kitchen. A narrow bed, a chest of drawers, a window facing east. Simple, clean of the clutter overwhelming the rest of the house. Previous housekeeper stayed here, he said, obviously. It's fine. Meals are... He stopped, rubbed his face with both hands. I don't know anymore. The children eat when they're hungry. I eat when I remember. There's no schedule, no... Christ, there used to be order. There used to be... Mr. Hart. Evelyn kept her voice gentle but firm. Why don't you show me the kitchen? Then you can get back to whatever needs doing outside. I'll handle supper. He looked at her with something between gratitude and despair. The children won't sit at the table. They haven't, not in months. Then we'll start with getting food in them, however it comes. Everything else can wait. Caleb nodded slowly. Chickens out back. Root cellars stocked enough. Pantries? Well, you'll see. He paused at the door. Miss Moore? Yes? If this is too much, if you want to leave, just say so. I'll drive you back to town tomorrow, no questions asked. You don't owe us suffering through something you can't handle. I appreciate that, Mr. Hart. but I'm not planning on leaving tomorrow. They all said that too. He left before she could respond, his boots heavy on the porch boards, heading toward the barn with the weight of a man who'd learned not to hope. Evelyn surveyed the kitchen. The mess was impressive, truly spectacular in its completeness. But underneath, she could see the ghost of what it had been. Good copper pots hung from hooks, though they needed polishing. The stove was quality, just needed cleaning and fresh coal. A shelf of spices stood in perfect alphabetical order, dusty but organized by someone who'd cared about such things, someone who wasn't here anymore. Evelyn rolled up her sleeves and started with the dishes. Not because they were the most important task, but because clean dishes meant the possibility of a real meal. And a real meal meant maybe, the children might believe this stranger intended to stay past sundown. She worked steadily, methodically, learning the kitchen through her hands. The pump needed priming. The good knives were hidden in a drawer, carefully wrapped in cloth. Someone had carved a small heart into the windowsill, along with initials, CH plus EH. The H's intertwined. Eleanor, Evelyn guessed. The wife who'd died, the mother the children grieved, the woman whose absence screamed from every corner of this house. A shadow appeared in the doorway. Sarah, watching with suspicious eyes. You're really washing dishes. They need washing. The one before last said she'd start fresh in the morning. She was gone before morning came. Evelyn kept scrubbing. What happened to her? Father found her at dawn, bags packed, walking toward town, 20 miles. She'd rather walk than stay another hour. Why'd she leave? Sarah shrugged with elaborate casualness. Ruth cried all night. Thomas had nightmares and screamed. I told her she was doing the eggs wrong, and she wasn't our mother, so she should stop pretending. Ah. Evelyn rinsed a plate, set it carefully in the drying rack. Were you trying to make her leave? The question clearly caught Sarah off guard. What? Testing her, seeing if she'd stay anyway. Evelyn glanced over her shoulder. It's what I'd do, in your place. If people are going to leave anyway, better to make them leave fast. Hurts less than hoping. Sarah's defenses crumbled a little more. You're strange. Probably. Can you show me where your mother kept the potatoes? Sarah hesitated, then moved into the kitchen with the wary steps of someone entering territory that still belonged to ghosts. Root cellar, out back. But... She stopped. But what? We don't go in there much. It was Mother's place. She organized everything just so, with labels and... Sarah's voice went thick. It still smells like her, like the soap she made. Evelyn set down her dish rag and turned to face this child who'd been forced to grow up too fast. Sarah, I'm not here to replace your mother. I can't, and I wouldn't try. But a root cellar's for storing food, and food's for keeping children fed. I think your mother would rather have you eating potatoes from her cellar than starving to honor her memory. How do you know what she'd want? You didn't know her. You're right, I didn't. So why don't you tell me about her? Sarah's eyes went wide. What? Your mother. What was she like? No one had asked. Evelyn could see it in the way Sarah's face transformed, shock giving way to desperate, aching need. The previous housekeepers had probably tiptoed around the topic, afraid to mention the dead woman whose shoes they were trying to fill. She sang, Sarah whispered, while she cooked. Not well. Father used to tease her about it. She'd throw dish towels at him, and he'd catch them and spin her around, and tears cut off the words. What did she sing? Old songs, church songs sometimes, but also silly ones she made up. About us, about the chickens, about anything. Sarah swiped at her eyes angrily. I can't remember them all anymore. It's only been 6 months, and I'm already forgetting. Evelyn's own mother had been dead 15 years, and she still woke sometimes reaching for songs that had slipped away. The forgetting's the worst part, feeling like you're losing them twice. Yes, Sarah's voice broke on the word. Everyone says it'll get easier, but they're lying. It doesn't get easier. You just get different, wrong. Not wrong, just carrying something heavy. Come on, show me that root cellar. We'll get potatoes together. Sarah led her outside as Thomas appeared on the porch steps, still silent, still watchful. The root cellar doors lay flat against the ground, angled to shed rain. Sarah pulled them open with practiced ease, revealing stairs descending into cool darkness. She was right. The space smelled of lavender soap and dried herbs, and everything was organized with meticulous care. Potatoes in bins, sorted by size, carrots in sand, onions braided and hanging, preserved goods lined up on shelves with labels in careful feminine script. Green beans, July 1877. Peaches, August 1877. Tomatoes, September 1877. The last summer of Eleanor Hart's life, preserved in glass jars. She was planning for this winter, Sarah said quietly. She preserved everything she could, like she knew. Her voice cracked. But she didn't know. She couldn't have. It happened so fast. Evelyn selected potatoes carefully, reverently. What happened, Sarah? Fever. Just fever, the kind everyone gets. But hers wouldn't break. Doctor came from Clarkston, but... Sarah wrapped her arms around herself. She asked for us at the end, told Father to take care of us, told me to watch the little ones. Then she just... The child's composure finally shattered. Sarah dissolved into sobs, standing in her dead mother's carefully organized cellar, surrounded by evidence of a future that woman would never see. Evelyn set down the potatoes and pulled Sarah into her arms. The girl resisted for half a heartbeat, then collapsed, sobbing into Evelyn's shoulder with the abandon of someone who'd been holding it together far too long. They stayed like that until the storm passed. When Sarah finally pulled back, her eyes were swollen but clearer. I miss her so much, she whispered. I know. Everyone says I need to be strong, for Thomas and Ruth, for Father. You are strong, but strong doesn't mean you can't fall apart sometimes. Sarah studied Evelyn's face like she was trying to memorize it, building a catalog of whether this woman's words matched her actions. Then she picked up the basket of potatoes. I'll help you cook, she said. I'm not very good, but Mother was teaching me before. I know some things. Then you'll teach me how your mother did it. They walked back to the house together, Sarah carrying potatoes and something that might have been the beginning of hope. Thomas waited on the porch, still silent, but closer than before. When they passed, Evelyn offered him a small smile. He didn't return it, but he didn't run away either. Progress came in small increments. The kitchen settled into purposeful activity. Sarah proved competent with vegetables, her knife work careful if slow. She narrated as she worked, unconsciously channeling her mother's voice. She always said to cut them even so they cooked the same. She said cooking's just paying attention to what things need. Evelyn assembled the rest of the meal from what the pantry offered. Chicken from out back, carrots, onions, herbs that still held flavor despite months of neglect. Nothing fancy, just food cooked with care. As the stove heated and good smells began filling the house, Thomas crept closer. He still didn't speak, but he sat on the floor near the kitchen doorway, watching. Ruth appeared soon after, attached to her sister but curious. You can come in, Evelyn said without turning around. Not much to see, but you're welcome anyway. Thomas stayed where he was. Ruth buried her face in Sarah's skirt. But they stayed. Caleb returned as the sun began its descent, covered in dust and exhaustion. He stopped in the doorway, staring at the scene. Clean kitchen, cooking food, his children present and not hiding, this strange, thin woman stirring a pot like she'd done it in this kitchen 1,000 times. We'll eat in about 20 minutes, Evelyn said. There's water warming if you want to wash up. He opened his mouth, closed it, nodded once, and disappeared toward the back of the house. 20 minutes later, Evelyn set food on the table. Real food, properly cooked, plated like it mattered. Caleb sat in his usual chair looking uncomfortable with the formality. Sarah helped Ruth into a high chair that had clearly gone unused for months. Thomas hovered between hiding and joining. Come on, Thomas, Sarah said softly. It's all right. He approached the table like it might bite him, climbing into his chair with exaggerated care. They ate in silence at first. Not uncomfortable silence, more like people remembering how this was supposed to work. Forks on plates. Food that tasted like someone cared. The simple ritual of a family meal. This is good, Caleb said finally. Really good. Sarah helped. She knows her way around vegetables. Sarah's head snapped up, surprise and pleasure warring on her face. Mother taught me, she said. Then, more hesitantly, Miss Moore says I'll teach her mother's way of doing things. Caleb's throat worked. Your mother was the best cook I ever knew. She burned the biscuits sometimes, Sarah said. Remember? She'd curse under her breath, and you'd pretend not to hear, but you were laughing. A tiny smile cracked Caleb's face. She had creative vocabulary for burned biscuits. She said the chickens didn't care if their breakfast was a little crispy. She said that about most of her disasters. They were talking about her, about Eleanor, and instead of painful silence, there were small smiles, shared memories. Ruth had stopped crying. Thomas was eating steadily, listening to stories about a mother he was probably starting to forget. After supper, Evelyn began cleaning while the family scattered to their evening routines. She expected solitude, but Sarah returned to dry dishes. Then Thomas appeared with a drawing he didn't show her but worked on nearby. Even Ruth parked herself on the floor with a rag doll worn shapeless from loving. They don't usually do this, Caleb said from the doorway. He'd been watching from the other room, and something in his voice sounded like wonder. Stay close, I mean. They've been separate since Eleanor. Maybe they're tired of being separate. Or maybe they want to make sure you don't disappear when they're not looking. Evelyn glanced at him. His expression held no accusation, just exhausted understanding of his children's fear. I'll be here in the morning, she said quietly. So were two of the others. Then they weren't. I know. He started to say something else, stopped, shook his head, and retreated to whatever evening work awaited. Bedtime came with expected resistance. Ruth cried, as Sarah had warned. But when Evelyn appeared in the doorway, the little girl reached for her with devastating trust. Evelyn lifted her carefully, feeling the fragile weight of this child who'd been broken too young. It's all right, she murmured, settling into the rocking chair by the window. Miss your mama? That's all right. You go ahead and cry. Ruth sobbed into her shoulder, and Evelyn rocked and hummed, not any particular song, just sound to fill the loneliness. Sarah watched from the hallway, something unreadable in her expression. Eventually, Ruth's sobs gentled to hiccups, then to exhausted breathing, her little fists unclenched from Evelyn's dress. She fell asleep, Sarah whispered, amazed. She never just... It usually takes hours. Sometimes people just need permission to let go. Evelyn shifted carefully, easing Ruth into her small bed. The child stirred but didn't wake. In the hallway, Thomas stood holding a worn stuffed rabbit. He didn't speak, but he held it out to Evelyn, offering, asking, testing. Is that for Ruth? Evelyn asked softly. He shook his head. For you? A nod. Does he have a name? Thomas's mouth opened. For a long moment, nothing came out. Then, barely audible, Blue. Sarah gasped. Thomas, you... But Thomas had already retreated, clutching Blue, disappearing into his room with the speed of someone who'd surprised himself. He hasn't spoken, Sarah breathed. Not in 4 months. Not since the funeral. The doctor said maybe never again, and Father... Tears spilled down her face. You've been here one day. One day. Children know when someone's actually listening. Maybe he just needed to find his voice again. Sarah stared at Evelyn like she was witnessing a miracle. Maybe she was. Maybe they both were. The small miracle of a child rediscovering speech, of a house remembering how to be a home. Later, in her small room off the kitchen, Evelyn sat on the edge of the narrow bed and let herself shake. The day crashed over her all at once. The humiliation at the station, the other women's contempt, the weight of these children's grief, the magnitude of what she'd agreed to attempt. 6 women had quit. 6 had looked at this situation and run. Evelyn pressed her palms against her eyes and breathed through the fear. She'd made a promise to tell them if she was leaving. That meant she had to stay long enough to keep it. Tomorrow, that might mean another day, and maybe another after that. One day at a time. That's all anyone could do. She changed into her nightgown, another flour sack creation, thin and patched, and slipped between sheets that smelled of sun and lavender. Eleanor's doing, probably. Even the linens carried her ghost. Outside her window, the ranch settled into night sounds. Chickens murmuring to themselves, horses moving in the paddock, the creak of the house adjusting to darkness, and underneath it all, silence. Not empty silence, full silence. The silence of children sleeping without screaming, of a father who might, for the first time in months, rest without expecting to be woken by crisis. Evelyn closed her eyes. Tomorrow would bring new tests, new chances for failure. But tonight, 3 children had eaten a real meal. One had spoken his first word in months. Another had cried herself to sleep in someone's arms instead of alone. It wasn't much, but it was something. And sometimes, something was enough to build on. Morning arrived with the smell of coffee and the sound of someone moving carefully through the kitchen, trying not to wake the house. Evelyn had been awake since before dawn, her body trained by years of making herself useful before anyone could question her presence. She'd stoked the fire, started breakfast, and swept the kitchen floor before the first light touched the eastern window. Sarah appeared in the doorway, hair still tangled from sleep, surprise written across her face. "You're still here. You're still..." "Said I would be." They all said that too. But Sarah's voice carried less conviction than yesterday, like maybe she was starting to believe this stranger might be different. "Then I'll have to keep saying it until you believe me. Can you gather eggs while I finish the biscuits?" Sarah nodded and disappeared outside, moving with the automatic efficiency of a child who'd taken on adult responsibilities too young. Through the window, Evelyn watched her navigate the chicken coop with practiced ease, talking softly to the hens like they were old friends. Thomas emerged next, clutching Blue the rabbit, his eyes finding Evelyn immediately. Testing. Making sure yesterday's miracle hadn't been a dream. "Good morning, Thomas." He opened his mouth, closed it, frustrated with himself. Yesterday's single word had apparently used up his courage. "Blue looks like he might be hungry," Evelyn said casually, turning back to her biscuits. "Think he'd like some bacon?" A pause. Then so quiet she almost missed it. "Yes." Evelyn didn't react, didn't make it significant, just nodded like small boys spoke to her every morning. "Then we'd better make extra." Caleb was the last to appear, stopping in the kitchen doorway with the same stunned expression he'd worn at supper. His hair was wet from washing, his shirt clean, and Evelyn realized this was the first time she'd seen him presentable. Grief had been wearing him like a coat, making him invisible beneath its weight. This morning she could see the man underneath, younger than she'd thought, with good bones in his face and eyes that might have laughed once. "You stayed," he said. "We've established that." Evelyn set plates on the table with more force than necessary. "Are you all going to greet me with surprise every morning, or will we eventually move past this?" Something flickered across his face. Might have been the ghost of amusement. "Probably take a few more mornings. Then sit down and eat. And shock's no excuse for cold biscuits." Breakfast passed with the same tentative peace as last night's supper. Ruth ate without crying. Thomas whispered answers to direct questions. Sarah actually smiled when Evelyn asked her to pass the butter. Small victories, each one. After the meal, Caleb stood with clear reluctance. "I need to check the north fence, probably be gone most of the day." "We'll manage." He hesitated, hat in hand, clearly wanting to say something he couldn't quite form. Finally, "The children, if they're too difficult." "Mr. Hart." Evelyn met his eyes steadily. "I raised my 3 younger brothers after our mother died. I know what difficult children look like, and these aren't it. These are grieving children trying to survive. There's a difference." His throat worked. "Eleanor used to say something similar. Then she was a wise woman. Go on, those fences won't check themselves." He left, but not before Evelyn caught him glancing back at the house 3 times, like he expected to return and find her gone despite all evidence to the contrary. The day settled into purposeful work. Evelyn tackled the main room while Sarah watched with territorial suspicion. "Mother had a system," Sarah warned, "for where things went." "Then teach me her system." They worked side by side, Sarah directing with increasing confidence, Evelyn following instructions without protest. The room emerged from chaos slowly, surfaces cleared, furniture arranged with intention, the accumulated debris of grief sorted into keep, mend, or discard. "That's Mother's sewing basket," Sarah said when Evelyn reached for it. "No one's touched it since..." "Should it stay out or be put away?" Sarah stared at the basket like it might bite her. "I don't know. Father can't look at it, but putting it away feels like we're erasing her." "What if we moved it to your room? That way it's not gone, just somewhere safe until you're ready to open it. Relief flooded Sarah's face. Yes, that's... Yes. They carried it together to Sarah's small bedroom, placing it carefully on a shelf where sun wouldn't fade the fabric. Sarah touched the basket's handle with reverent fingers. She was teaching me to quilt, she whispered. We'd started one together. She said every woman should know how to make something beautiful and useful both. Did you finish it? No, I tried, but I couldn't remember the pattern, and everything I did looked wrong, and her voice cracked. I gave up. Evelyn opened the basket carefully. Inside lay fabric pieces cut with precision, a half-finished quilt block, needles stuck in a pincushion shaped like a tomato, and underneath, a paper with Eleanor Hart's handwriting, Sarah's star pattern, for my girl. She left you instructions, Evelyn said softly. Sarah took the paper with shaking hands. I didn't know. I didn't look. I couldn't. Maybe you weren't ready then, but maybe you are now. They left the basket open, the pattern visible, possibility hanging in the air. Downstairs, Thomas had settled on the floor with his drawings. He'd covered page after page with the same image, a house, a family of stick figures, and above them all, a woman with wings. That's beautiful, Thomas, Evelyn said, crouching beside him. He pointed to the winged figure. Your mother? A nod. Is she an angel now? He frowned, frustrated, grabbed a fresh page and drew furiously. The same house, the same family, but this time the winged woman stood behind them, hands on their shoulders. Protecting, not leaving. Ah, Evelyn breathed. She's still with you, just different. Thomas looked at her with such desperate hope it nearly broke her heart. Then he whispered, Is she proud? The question hung between them, enormous and aching. Of you? Oh, sweetheart, I think she's so proud she could burst. You've been so brave, taking care of Blue, helping your sisters, being strong when everything's hard. I think she sees all of it. Even when I don't talk? Especially then. Sometimes the bravest thing is surviving another day. He leaned against her shoulder, just for a moment, then pulled back and returned to his drawings. But something in his posture had eased, like a weight he'd been carrying alone had gotten lighter. Lunch was simple, bread and cheese and apples from the root cellar. They ate on the porch, watching clouds build in the west. Ruth sat on Evelyn's lap, playing with her worn doll, occasionally touching Evelyn's face like she was making sure this person was real. Storm coming, Sarah observed, reading the sky with frontier competence. Big one, probably. Your father should be back before it hits. Maybe. Sarah's voice went tight. Or maybe he'll stay out working until he's too exhausted to think. He does that sometimes, especially on bad days. What makes a day bad? Remembering. Something will remind him, a song she sang, or the way light hits the kitchen window, or just anything, and he'll go quiet and disappear into work until we don't see him for hours. Evelyn understood that impulse. Grief ambushed you at strange moments. The trick was learning to survive the ambush without destroying yourself in the process. If he's not back when the storm hits, we'll make sure there's hot food waiting when he comes in. Sarah studied her with those two old eyes. Why are you being nice to us? Why wouldn't I be? Everyone else acted nice at first too. But it was fake nice, performance nice, you can tell the difference. And what kind of nice am I? I don't know yet. Sarah's honesty was cutting. But it feels different. It feels... She stopped, struggling. It feels like you actually see us. Not just work you have to do, but actual people. That's because you are actual people. Seems like the minimum requirement for decent treatment. The woman before last said Thomas was damaged and Ruth was hopeless. She said it where we could hear. Rage flashed through Evelyn, hot and protective. Then she was a fool who didn't deserve to be in the same house with you. Sarah blinked, surprised by the vehemence. You're not damaged, Evelyn continued, looking at each child in turn. None of you. You're hurt. There's a difference. Hurt can heal if someone cares enough to help it. And you care enough? I'm here, aren't I? The storm rolled in an hour later with the dramatic violence only prairie storms could manage. Wind hit first, bending grass flat and sending chickens scattering for shelter. Then rain, turning the world gray and loud. Caleb still wasn't back. Evelyn moved through the house, securing windows, checking for leaks, lighting lamps against the sudden darkness. The children clustered together in the main room, drawn to each other by weather that made the world feel small and fragile. "Tell us a story," Sarah said suddenly. Evelyn paused in lighting a lamp. "What kind of story?" "A true one. About you." "Why?" "Because you know everything about us, and we don't know anything about you. That's not fair." "Fair point." Evelyn settled into Eleanor's rocking chair, still felt strange to claim it, but the children's expectant faces gave her permission. "All right, true story. When I was about Sarah's age, my mother died. Fever, like yours. Fast and cruel and wrong." Thunder rumbled outside, punctuating her words. "I had 3 younger brothers who needed raising. My father, he tried, but he didn't know how. Didn't know how to braid hair or cook proper meals or help with nightmares. He was drowning, and he was dragging us all down with him." "What did you do?" Sarah whispered. "I got angry. Really, properly angry. Angry at death for taking her." Ruth had gone still in Evelyn's lap, listening with an intensity that belied her 3 years. "And then what happened?" Thomas asked, his small voice barely audible over the rain. "I realized anger wasn't going to cook supper or clean clothes or make my brothers feel safe. So I learned, made 1,000 mistakes, burned so many meals the neighbors probably thought we were signaling for help, sewed shirts that fell apart the first time anyone moved wrong. But I kept trying, and eventually, trying turned into knowing how." "Did the anger go away?" Sarah's question cut straight to the heart of it. "No, it just changed, turned into something I could use, energy instead of rage. Every meal I cooked right, every shirt that held together, every night my brothers slept without crying. That was me fighting back against the unfairness. That was me saying death doesn't get to win everything." "Is that why you're here?" Sarah's eyes were sharp, understanding. "You're still fighting?" "Maybe. Or maybe I just know what it's like to be the child everyone doubts. The one people look at and decide isn't enough." The words hung in the rain-loud air, confession and connection both. "Those women at the station," Sarah said slowly, "they looked at you like you were nothing." "They did." "Did it hurt?" "Yes. But you stayed anyway." "I stayed because of you, because I saw 3 children who needed someone to stay more than I needed to protect myself from being looked at wrong." Sarah's face crumpled. She fought it, tried to maintain her fierce competence, but the fight was lost before it started. She crossed to Evelyn and buried her face in her shoulder, crying with the abandon she'd probably been denying herself for months. "I'm so tired," she sobbed. "I'm so tired of being the one who holds everything together. I'm 10. I shouldn't have to. I don't know how to—" "I know, sweetheart. I know." Thomas joined them, crawling into Evelyn's lap beside Ruth, and suddenly she had all 3 Hart children clinging to her like she was the only solid thing in a shifting world. She held them and rocked and let them fall apart, because sometimes falling apart was the only way to start putting yourself back together. The front door banged open. Caleb stood in the doorway, soaked through and wild-eyed, clearly having ridden hard through the storm. He froze at the sight before him. His 3 children wrapped around this stranger, crying like their hearts were breaking. "What?" His voice came out raw. "What happened? What did you but—" "Nothing happened," Evelyn said calmly, still rocking. "They're just tired of being brave all the time." He stared, water dripping from his hat, understanding and pain warring on his face. "Eleanor used to, when they were small, she'd hold them when they needed holding?" "Yes." "Then come here and do it yourself." He crossed the room like a man moving through deep water, dropping to his knees beside the rocking chair. Sarah threw herself at him first, then Thomas, all of them tangled together, months of held-back grief finally finding release. Evelyn tried to extract herself, give them privacy, but Ruth's fists tightened in her dress, and Caleb's hand landed on her shoulder. "Stay," he said roughly. "Please." So she stayed, this strange woman in a family's most intimate moment, bearing witness to their breaking and their healing both. Eventually the storm inside and outside both began to ease, the children's sobs gentled to hiccups, the rain softened to steady drumming. Caleb's shoulders stopped shaking. "I'm sorry," he said finally, his voice wrecked. "I'm sorry I haven't been. I couldn't—" "Papa," Sarah whispered. "It's okay. It's not okay. Your children, You shouldn't have to. He stopped, swallowed hard. Your mother would be so angry with me for letting it get this bad, for not. Mama would understand, Sarah said with sudden fierce certainty. She'd understand you were sad too. He pulled his children closer, and Evelyn saw him really look at them, see them, for the first time in months. The shock of it played across his face, realizing how much time had passed, how much they'd changed, how much he'd missed while drowning in his own grief. When did you get so tall? He asked Thomas. The boy straightened a little. I grew. You did. You really did. Caleb's voice cracked. I'm sorry I didn't notice. It's okay, Papa. It's not, but I'm going to do better, I promise. Promises were dangerous things, Evelyn knew. Easy to make, hard to keep. But watching Caleb hold his children with desperate intention, she thought maybe this was one he meant. Supper that evening felt different. The children talked more. Caleb listened, and the silences between words carried comfort instead of pain. Evelyn served pot roast that had been cooking all afternoon, filling the house with smells that spoke of home and care and continuity. This tastes like. Caleb stopped, fork halfway to his mouth. Like what? Sarah asked. Like your mother's recipe. Exactly like it. Evelyn kept her expression neutral. Sarah showed me the instructions in the cookbook, the one with all the notes in the margins. Caleb set down his fork carefully. You used Eleanor's cookbook. It seemed wasteful not to, all those recipes just sitting there, but if you'd rather I didn't. No. His voice came out strangled. No, thank you. For asking Sarah, for. He couldn't finish, but his meaning was clear. After supper, Sarah disappeared to her room and returned with her mother's sewing basket. Miss Moore says maybe we could finish the quilt, she said tentatively. Mother's quilt. The one she was teaching me, if that's all right. Caleb's hand trembled as he reached for the pattern Eleanor had written. His eyes tracked over her handwriting, seeing her in every loop and line. She'd want you to finish it, he said finally. She'd want. His voice broke. She'd want all of this. You eating her recipes, sewing with her fabric, using her things, keeping her alive by living. Really? Sarah's voice was so small, so hopeful. Really? He pulled her close, kissed the top of her head. I'm sorry I made you think otherwise. I'm sorry I couldn't. I was so afraid that moving forward meant leaving her behind. We could never leave her behind, Sarah whispered. She's in everything. Yes. Yes, she is. That night, when the children were asleep, Evelyn found Caleb on the porch, staring out at the clear sky the storm had left behind. She almost turned back, not wanting to intrude, but he spoke before she could retreat. Sit with me? She settled on the porch step, leaving space between them, aware suddenly of the impropriety. Unmarried woman, widowed man, alone in the darkness. But propriety seemed less important than the raw honesty of the moment. I haven't cried, Caleb said quietly. Not since the funeral. I couldn't. The children needed me strong, and if I started, I was afraid I'd never stop. But they didn't need you strong. They needed you present. I know that now. I didn't know it then. He rubbed his face with both hands. 6 women came before you, good women, capable women, and I drove them all away. How? By being exactly what you saw when you arrived, half dead, absent even when I was standing right there. The children were impossible because I'd made them impossible. No routine, no structure, no. He stopped. They'd test every woman who came, waiting for me to notice, to care, to do something. And I never did. I just kept hiring replacements like you could replace. His voice shattered. Finally, the tears came. Months of them, held back by sheer will, now flooding through broken defenses. Evelyn stayed quiet, letting him break, understanding that sometimes witnessing was the kindest thing you could offer. When he could speak again, his voice was raw. Why did you stay? The others saw the mess and ran. You saw the same mess, and I saw 3 children who needed someone to choose them, and a man who needed permission to grieve. You barely know us. I know enough. I know what it's like to be the one everyone doubts, the one people decide isn't worth the effort. She paused, weighing words. Those women at the station looked at me like I was nothing. Your children looked at me like I might be something. That difference mattered. Caleb turned to face her, really seeing her for the first time. Not the desperate woman who'd answered his notice, not the housekeeper who'd exceeded expectations, but Evelyn herself, thin and fierce and carrying her own weight of survival. "I can't pay you more," he said. "I wish I could, but the ranch is barely—" "I'm not asking for more." "Then what are you asking for?" Honesty rose in Evelyn's throat, dangerous and necessary. "A place, just a place to be, where someone sees me as more than temporary help, where I'm—" She stopped, surprised by her own vulnerability. "Where I'm wanted." "You're wanted," Caleb said quietly. "My children haven't smiled in 6 months. Today they smiled. Ruth hasn't fallen asleep without screaming since Eleanor died. Last night she slept. Thomas hasn't spoken, and this morning he asked for bacon." His voice went rough with emotion. "In 2 days, you've done what 6 women and I couldn't do in 6 months. So yes, you're wanted, desperately." The weight of his words settled around them, carrying meanings neither was quite ready to examine. "I should check on the children," Evelyn said, standing quickly. "Make sure the storm didn't wake them." She fled before he could respond, before the moment could become more than she knew how to handle. But his words followed her inside, curling around her heart like a promise she was afraid to believe. In her small room, she pressed her hands against her face and let herself shake. 2 days. She'd been here 2 days, and already this family was seeping into her bones, making her care in ways that felt dangerous. Caring meant risking. Risking meant the possibility of loss. And loss was something she'd spent years learning to avoid. But as she lay in this darkness, listening to the house settle around her, Evelyn realized avoidance had kept her safe, but also kept her alone. Maybe, just maybe, this strange broken family was worth the risk. Morning would bring new challenges. But tonight, 3 children slept peacefully, and a man had finally let himself grieve, and a woman who'd been nobody to everyone had become somebody to someone. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make her want to stay another day, and maybe another after that. The 3rd week brought a visitor neither of them expected. Evelyn was kneading bread dough while Sarah practiced her stitching nearby when the sound of an approaching wagon cut through the morning quiet. Caleb emerged from the barn, his posture going rigid the moment he recognized the fine black carriage rolling up the drive. "Who is it?" Sarah asked, wariness creeping into her voice. "Jonah Reed," Caleb said flatly. "Stay inside." But Evelyn had already seen the man stepping down from his carriage, tall, impeccably dressed despite the dust of travel, carrying himself with the casual authority of someone accustomed to getting his way. Behind him, 2 men remained on the wagon, their hands resting too deliberately near their belts. "Hart," Reed called out, his voice smooth as whiskey. "Been meaning to ride out. See how you're managing." "We're managing fine." Caleb positioned himself between Reed and the house, and Evelyn noticed how his hand drifted toward the rifle propped near the door. "Are you?" Reed's eyes swept the property with practiced assessment. "Heard you finally found someone willing to stay. Must be quite the woman to succeed where 6 others failed." Something in his tone made Evelyn's skin crawl. She moved to the window, keeping the children behind her. "The ranch is doing well," Caleb said, each word careful. "Appreciate your concern, but we don't need anything." "Actually, that's not quite true." Reed pulled papers from his coat pocket. "You're 3 months behind on your loan payment, Hart. 3 months, that's grounds for foreclosure under the terms we agreed." The blood drained from Caleb's face. "I've got the money. Just needed time to— Eleanor's medical bills, the funeral. I've been working to—" "I understand grief is difficult," Reed said, and he even sounded sympathetic. "But business is business. The bank can't make exceptions, even for personal tragedy. I'll have your money by end of month, every cent with interest." "End of month might be too late." Reed stepped closer, dropping his voice just loud enough that Evelyn could still hear. "But we might be able to work something out. You know, I've always thought this land was wasted on small ranching. Combined with my holdings, it could be quite profitable. I could offer you a fair price, enough to settle your debts and start fresh somewhere else. This is my home, my children's home. I'm not selling. Even if staying means losing everything anyway." Reed's sympathy curdled into something colder. Think about those children, Hart. What happens to them when the bank takes the ranch? Where will they go? Who'll take 3 orphans with nothing to their names? Caleb's hands clenched into fists. Don't you dare. I'm trying to help you see reason. You're one man, alone, drowning. How long before you can't manage anymore? How long before something happens and those children are left with nobody? Evelyn pushed through the door before she could think better of it. He's not alone. Both men turned. Reed's eyes raked over her with the same dismissive assessment she'd endured at the train station, but underneath ran something darker, calculating. And you are? Evelyn Moore. I work here. The new housekeeper. Reed's smile didn't reach his eyes. How long has it been? 2 weeks? 3? Forgive me if I don't count on your staying power. The others certainly didn't have any. The others weren't me. No, you're right. They had references, experience, families with standing. You have... He paused deliberately. What exactly do you have, Miss Moore? The insult was clear enough to make Caleb step forward. Reed, it's a fair question, Reed continued. I make it my business to know who's living on properties I hold interest in. But I can't find anything about you before you arrived in Clarkston. No family, no history, nothing. Almost like you're running from something. Ice ran down Evelyn's spine. She'd hoped her past would stay buried where she'd left it, 3 states and 2 years away. My past is my own business. Not when it affects my investment. Reed's voice hardened. What are you hiding, Miss Moore? Debts? A husband you ran from? Something worse? Get off my land, Caleb said, his voice dropping to something dangerous. Now. Reed raised his hands in mock surrender. I'm simply looking out for those children's welfare. As a concerned citizen, I have to wonder if they're safe with a woman of questionable background and a father too grief-stricken to see straight. The children are fine, Evelyn said, fighting to keep her voice steady. Are they? Reed's eyes went cold. Because I've heard concerning things. A 5-year-old who won't speak. A 3-year-old who screams every night. A 10-year-old trying to raise her siblings because her father's abandoned his responsibilities. That sounds like neglect to me. Might be something the territorial judge should hear about. The threat landed like a physical blow. Caleb went white. You wouldn't... I would hate to involve the authorities, Reed said, and he sounded almost sincere. But if those children are suffering, if they're being raised in an unstable environment by an unfit father and a woman with a mysterious past, well, I'd be failing my civic duty not to report it. They're not suffering, Evelyn said, her voice shaking with rage. They're healing. There's a difference. Is there? From what I hear, you've been here less than a month and already you've got them dependent on you. What happens when you leave like all the others? More trauma, more abandonment. Is that healing? Sarah appeared in the doorway, Thomas and Ruth behind her. We're not being neglected. Miss Moore takes good care of us. Sarah, inside, Caleb ordered. But Reed had already shifted his attention, his expression transforming into something that might have passed for kindness on a less calculating face. Sarah, sweetheart, I knew your mother. She'd want what's best for you and your siblings. Do you think this is what she'd want? You living in a house with strangers, your father barely managing, everything falling apart? Mama's dead, Sarah said, her voice fierce despite the tears gathering in her eyes. And you didn't come when she was dying. You didn't come to her funeral. You don't get to pretend you care now. Sarah, Reed started. No. She stepped forward, small and furious. You want our ranch. You don't care about us. You just want Father desperate enough to sell. Reed's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cruel underneath. Then he smoothed it back into place, turning to Caleb. End of month, Hart. Full payment, or I start foreclosure proceedings. And I'll be talking to Judge Morrison about those children's situation. For their own good, you understand. He climbed back into his carriage, signaling his men. As they rolled away, Evelyn saw him watching her through the window with an expression that promised this wasn't over. The moment they disappeared down the road, Caleb's legs seemed to give out. He sat heavily on the porch steps, his head in his hands. I don't have the money, he said quietly. I've been trying, working every hour I can, but Eleanor's medicine, the doctor's bills, the funeral, I'm $300 short. I'll never make that in 2 weeks. Evelyn's mind raced. $300 might as well be $3,000 for people like them. The loan, what were the terms? Standard rate when I took it 5 years ago. Built the addition on the house, bought breeding stock, was paying it down fine until his voice broke. Until everything fell apart. Did Reed hold the original loan? No, local bank held it. But they sold it to Reed 6 months ago, right after Eleanor died. Caleb looked up, and Evelyn saw understanding dawning in his eyes. He waited. He waited until I was at my weakest, then bought the debt. Why would he want this ranch so badly? Water. Sarah spoke up from the doorway. That's what Mother used to say. We've got the best water rights in the valley. Everyone else's wells run shallow in summer, but ours never do. Reed's been buying up neighboring properties, but without our water access, his land's worth half what it could be. Caleb nodded slowly. Eleanor figured that out before she got sick. She said Reed had been circling like a vulture, just waiting for an opportunity. And her death gave him one, Evelyn said, anger burning cold in her chest. He's been sabotaging you, making sure you couldn't recover, couldn't catch up. Also, he could take this place. Doesn't matter why. He's got the law on his side. I default, he forecloses. And if he convinces Judge Morrison that the children are at risk, Caleb's hands shook. He could take them. Put them in an orphanage or with some family he controls. I'd lose everything. Thomas had started crying silently, the way children do when they're too frightened to make noise. Ruth clung to Sarah's skirt. Sarah herself looked like she was holding herself together through pure will. Evelyn thought of Reed's calculating eyes, the casual cruelty in his voice, the way he'd smiled while threatening children. Men like that didn't make empty threats. They made promises. There has to be a way, she said. There isn't. Caleb's voice was dead. I've been over it 1,000 times. I could sell the breeding stock, but I'd get maybe half what they're worth in a rushed sale, and then I'd have no way to rebuild. I could take a loan from someone else, but who'd lend to a man already defaulting? He stopped, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. I'm going to lose everything Eleanor and I built. I'm going to lose our children's home. The defeat in his words was crushing, but Evelyn hadn't survived the last 5 years by accepting defeat when it came calling. How much do you trust the people in Clarkston? She asked. Caleb looked at her like she'd lost her mind. What? The townspeople, your neighbors, the ones who knew Eleanor. How much do they trust you? I don't know. Before Eleanor died, we had friends, people who cared, but I haven't been to town in months. Then it's time to start. Evelyn's mind was working fast now, pieces falling into a pattern she could almost see. Reed thinks he's won because he's isolated you, made you feel alone, helpless. But you're not alone. Sarah, when was the last time your father went to church? Sarah's eyes widened. Before Mama's funeral. And before that? Every Sunday, Mama sang in the choir. Father helped with repairs on the building. We were part of things. Exactly. Reed's counting on everyone seeing you as the broken widower, too grief-stricken to function. But what if they saw something different? What if they saw a man fighting to save his family's home? Hope flickered across Caleb's face, fragile as candlelight. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting you stop hiding. Go to town. Go to church. Let people see you're still here, still fighting. Let them see your children are being cared for, that things are improving. Make Reed's threats about neglect look like what they are, lies designed to steal from a grieving family. That won't get me $300. No, but it might get you time. And it might get you allies. Reed's powerful, but men like him make enemies. If people see what he's really doing, they won't believe me over him, Caleb interrupted. He's respected, rich, connected. You're not just anything, Evelyn said fiercely. You're a father fighting for his children. You're a man who's been through hell and is still standing. That matters. Make it matter. Sarah was nodding, her strategic mind already working. Mrs. Patterson in town used to be Mother's best friend. She stopped visiting after the funeral, but Mother said she was just giving us space to grieve. If Father talked to her, And Mr. Chen at the general store, Thomas added quietly. Everyone turned to stare at him. Full sentences were still rare enough to be remarkable. He said Father was always fair, that he'd help if Father needed it. See? Evelyn looked at Caleb. You have people. You've just forgotten they exist. Caleb stood slowly, something shifting in his posture. Not hope exactly, but the absence of total defeat. Sunday service is in 3 days. We should go, together. All of us? Sarah asked. All of us. As a family. He looked at Evelyn. If you're willing. I'm willing. The next 3 days passed in purposeful preparation. Evelyn took inventory of what they had. Caleb's one good suit, dusty but serviceable. Sarah's Sunday dress, let out quickly to account for growth. Thomas and Ruth had outgrown their church clothes entirely, which sent Evelyn to Eleanor's sewing basket with determination. She worked late into the nights, her fingers flying through fabric Eleanor had saved for future projects. Sarah sat with her, learning stitches her mother had meant to teach her, the two of them talking quietly while the house slept. Are you scared? Sarah asked on the second night, watching Evelyn attach buttons to Thomas's new shirt. Of what? Of Reed. Of what he might do. Evelyn set down her sewing and looked at the girl honestly. Yes, men like him are dangerous because they have power, and they're willing to use it without conscience. But being scared doesn't mean doing nothing. What if it doesn't work? What if people don't believe Father? Then we try something else. And something after that. We keep trying until we find a way, or until there are no ways left. And if there are no ways left? Evelyn had asked herself the same question. The truth was ugly. Then at least we went down fighting. At least we didn't just surrender. Sarah nodded slowly. Mother used to say that some things are worth fighting for even when you know you'll lose. She said that's what makes them important. Your mother was right. They worked in companionable silence until Sarah spoke again, softer now. I'm glad you came. I know I tested you at first, tried to make you leave, but I'm glad you stayed. Evelyn's throat tightened. I'm glad I stayed too. Sunday morning arrived with crystalline clarity. Evelyn dressed in her one good dress, still obviously homemade, still obviously poor, but clean and carefully pressed. She'd stayed up past midnight the night before, fixing a torn seam and adding a bit of lace she'd found in Eleanor's basket. The children looked transformed. Sarah in her altered dress, hair braided with ribbon. Thomas in his new shirt, standing straighter than Evelyn had ever seen him. Even Ruth wore a simple dress Evelyn had made, looking almost like a normal 3-year-old instead of a grief-haunted ghost. Caleb emerged last, and Evelyn's breath caught. He'd shaved carefully, trimmed his hair, put on the suit he'd worn to his wedding 10 years ago. He looked like a man who'd decided to rejoin the living. You all look... His voice caught. Eleanor would be so proud. The drive to Clarkston felt longer than it was, weighted with anticipation and fear. As they approached the church, Evelyn saw people gathering outside the way small communities do, catching up before service. The moment the Hart wagon came into view, conversation stopped. Caleb pulled to a stop and sat there, his courage visibly wavering. Sarah reached over and squeezed his hand. Together, she said. They climbed down as a unit, Caleb carrying Ruth, Sarah holding Thomas's hand, Evelyn bringing up the rear. The crowd parted, faces ranging from surprise to pity to uncomfortable guilt. An older woman broke from the group first, her eyes filling with tears. Caleb Hart, you stubborn fool. 3 months we've been worried sick, and you couldn't spare time to let us know you were surviving? Mrs. Patterson, Caleb said, and his voice cracked. I'm sorry, I didn't know how to... Oh, hush. She pulled him into a fierce hug, Ruth caught between them. Eleanor would box your ears for shutting us all out. But you're here now, and that's what matters. She pulled back, studying his face. You look better, different. I'm trying to be. Mrs. Patterson's attention shifted to the children, and her expression transformed to something tender. Look at you 3. Sarah, you're nearly grown. Thomas, so tall. And Ruth... Oh, sweetheart, don't you look pretty? Then her eyes found Evelyn and sharpened. And who might you be? Evelyn Moore, ma'am. I'm helping at the ranch. The one who stayed, Mrs. Patterson said, and something in her tone suggested she'd heard about the 6 who hadn't. She studied Evelyn with unsettling intensity, then nodded once. Good. They needed someone with spine. Come inside, all of you. You've missed enough Sundays. They filed into the small church, and Evelyn felt every eye tracking their movement. The Hart family had been absent long enough that their return was an event. They slid into a pew near the back, Caleb positioning himself between his children and the congregation's stairs. The service proceeded normally enough until the minister, an elderly man with kind eyes and a voice like gravel, paused before his sermon. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the Hart family's return to our congregation. Caleb, children, we're glad to see you. This community grieves with you, and we're here if you need us. Caleb stood slowly, and Evelyn saw how much courage it cost him. Thank you, Reverend, and thank you all for... He stopped, started again. I'm sorry I've been absent. Grief made me selfish, made me forget that Eleanor loved this community, and she'd expect better from me. We understand, son, the Reverend said gently. I appreciate that, but understanding doesn't excuse neglect. My children need community. They need to know they're not alone in this world. And his voice strengthened. I need to ask for help. A murmur ran through the congregation. Asking for help was admitting weakness, especially for a man. But Caleb pressed forward. Some of you know I'm behind on ranch payments. What you might not know is that Jonah Reed has bought my debt and is threatening foreclosure. He's also suggested to anyone who'll listen that my children are being neglected, that they should be removed from my care. The murmur turned angry. Mrs. Patterson's face went hard. Anyone with eyes can see those children are fine, she said loudly. Better than fine. They look cared for. They are, Caleb said. Thanks to Miss Moore, who's done what I couldn't. Brought order back, given them stability. But Reed's using her mysterious past against us, suggesting she's unfit. Every eye swung to Evelyn. She forced herself not to shrink, meeting their stares with as much dignity as she could gather. I'm not mysterious, she said quietly. I'm just private. My family's dead. I needed work. Mr. Hart needed help. That's all there is to it. And yet you stayed when 6 others quit, an older man said from across the aisle. That's unusual. Makes a body wonder why. Wonder all you want, Evelyn said, letting some steel show. I stayed because those children needed someone to. Because running away felt like cowardice. Because... She stopped, surprised by her own honesty. Because I was tired of being nobody to everyone. Here, I'm somebody. I matter. That's reason enough. The congregation sat with that, weighing her words against her obvious poverty, her thin frame, her homemade dress. Evelyn could see the calculation happening. Was she genuine, or was this some elaborate con? Mrs. Patterson stood abruptly. I knew Eleanor Hart for 15 years. She was the best judge of character I've ever met, and she would have liked this woman. She pointed at Evelyn. I can tell because her children like her, and children know truth when adults are still busy judging. The question isn't whether Miss Moore is suitable, another woman said. It's whether Jonah Reed has the right to threaten this family, and I say he doesn't. Agreement rippled through the congregation. The minister raised his hands for quiet. This is a house of worship, not a town meeting, but... He paused, weighing words. Caleb, what exactly are you asking for? Time, Caleb said simply. I need time to get Reed his money, and I need witnesses that my children are being properly cared for. So when he tries to convince Judge Morrison otherwise, there are voices to counter his lies. You'll have them, Mr. Chen called from the back. Anyone with sense can see what Reed's really after. Your water rights, someone else added. He's been trying to corner the valley's water for years. The conversation devolved into angry muttering about Reed's business practices, deals gone sour, debts called in at convenient times. Evelyn listened with growing understanding. Reed had made enemies. He'd just been powerful enough that no one dared challenge him individually. But together they might have a chance. After the service, people clustered around Caleb, offering support, asking what they could do. Mrs. Patterson cornered Evelyn on the church steps. How bad is it really? She asked quietly. Bad. He needs $300 in 2 weeks or Reed forecloses. And Reed's threatened to have the children taken if Caleb can't prove adequate care. Mrs. Patterson's jaw tightened. That snake. Eleanor told me to watch him, said he was circling. I should have paid more attention after she died. No one could have known. We should have checked on them, should have helped instead of giving them space. She looked at the children, now surrounded by other youngsters their age, looking almost normal. They really are doing better? They're healing. It takes time, but yes. And you? Are you staying, or are you another temporary fix? The question cut deep because Evelyn had been asking herself the same thing. What happened when the crisis passed? When Caleb didn't need her anymore? When the children were whole again? I'm staying as long as I'm wanted, she said finally. Mrs. Patterson studied her with those sharp eyes. You're running from something, I can tell, but you're also running towards something which is different. Just remember, this family's been hurt enough. Don't add to it unless you're sure. I'm sure. Good. Then you'll need all the help you can get. Reed doesn't lose gracefully. She lowered her voice. Watch yourself around him. There are rumors about what happened to people who got in his way. Nothing proven, but be careful. The warning settled cold in Evelyn's stomach, but she nodded, filing it away with everything else she was learning about Jonah Reed. The ride home was lighter, filled with the children's chatter about friends they'd reconnected with, games they'd played. For a few hours they'd been normal children in a normal family. The healing that brought showed in every smile. Caleb was quieter, but his silence felt thoughtful rather than defeated. When they arrived back at the ranch, he helped everyone down from the wagon, then turned to Evelyn. Thank you, he said, for pushing me to go. For everything. You did the hard part. You asked for help. Doesn't mean we'll get it. $300 is still $300. But now people know what Reed's really doing. That changes things. He nodded slowly, then surprised her by reaching out and squeezing her hand briefly. Eleanor would have liked you. Mrs. Patterson was right about that. The words settled warm in Evelyn's chest, an absolution she hadn't known she needed. That night, after the children were asleep, Evelyn sat at the kitchen table with paper and pencil, working through numbers. $300. 2 weeks. The ranch's assets versus its debts. Every angle she examined led to the same conclusion. There was no legitimate way to raise that much money that fast, which meant they needed an illegitimate way, or at least an unconventional one. She was still working when Caleb appeared in the doorway, unable to sleep. Find any miracles? He asked. Not yet, but I'm not done looking. He sat across from her, studying the figures she'd scratched out. You're good with numbers. Had to be. When you're managing a household on nothing, math becomes survival. Where did you learn? The question was casual, but Evelyn heard the real inquiry underneath. Who are you? Where did you come from? Why won't you say? My father was a teacher, she said finally, before my mother died. He wasn't much of anything, but he taught me enough that I could teach my brothers, keep the household accounts, figure out how to stretch nothing into something. That doesn't sound like running from something. That sounds like surviving something. Evelyn met his eyes. Maybe there's not much difference. I think there's all the difference. He paused. Reed implied you were hiding something criminal, something that would make you unfit. And you want to know if he's right. I want to know if I need to worry. Not for myself. For the children. If there's something in your past that could hurt them. There isn't. Evelyn's voice came out harder than she intended. I'm not a criminal. I haven't hurt anyone. She stopped, the words catching in her throat. You just what? I just got tired of being told I wasn't enough. That I was too poor, too plain, too nothing to matter. So I left. Walked away from people who made me feel small and went looking for somewhere I could be. She couldn't finish. Be seen, Caleb said softly. Be valued. Yes. They sat with that truth between them, understanding passing without need for more words. Caleb knew what it was to feel inadequate, to be measured against impossible standards and found wanting. Evelyn knew what it was to be invisible until someone chose to see you. Whatever else happens, Caleb said finally, you're not nothing, not to my children, not to... He stopped and something shifted in his expression. Not to me. The words hung in the air, weighted with meanings neither was quite ready to examine. Evelyn's heart stuttered, hope and fear tangling together. Before she could respond, a sound cut through the night, the thunder of approaching horses moving fast. Caleb was on his feet instantly, grabbing the rifle from above the door. Evelyn moved to the window, peering into darkness lit only by a rising moon. 3 riders pulled up in the yard, their faces obscured by shadows and hat brims. But Evelyn recognized the lead horse, Reed's black stallion. "Hart!" Reed's voice carried clear through the night. "We need to talk." Caleb stepped onto the porch, rifle held loose but ready. "It's past midnight, Reed. Whatever you want can wait for daylight." "I don't think so." Reed dismounted, his men following suit. "See, I heard about your little performance at church today. Very touching, very convincing. It wasn't a performance, wasn't it? Suddenly you're the devoted father, the pillar of the community, the victim of cruel circumstance. You've got old women weeping and hard men nodding along. Quite the transformation from the broken drunk I saw 3 weeks ago." "I was never drunk," Caleb said, his voice dangerous. "No? Could have fooled me. Could have fooled everyone. But then she showed up." Reed jerked his chin at Evelyn, visible through the window. "And suddenly, you're reformed. Makes a man wonder what her real game is." "There's no game. She's helping my family." "Is she? Or is she positioning herself to take advantage of a desperate widower? Wouldn't be the first time a woman with nothing saw opportunity in a man with something to lose." Evelyn pushed through the door before Caleb could respond. "Say what you came to say, Mr. Reed. Then get off this property." Reed's smile turned sharp. "There she is, the mysterious Miss Moore. I've been making inquiries about you. Very interesting, what I found." Ice ran down Evelyn's spine. "I'm sure I don't care." "No? Not even when I tell you I know about Richmond? About the family you worked for there? About why you left so suddenly in the middle of the night?" The world tilted. Evelyn forced herself to stay upright, to keep her face neutral, even as panic clawed at her throat. Richmond. He knew about Richmond. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice shook. "Don't you? The wealthy family, the husband who took too much interest in the help, the wife who blamed you instead of him, the accusations of theft when you tried to leave, the warrant that might still be outstanding if anyone bothered to look?" "There was no theft," Evelyn said, her voice breaking. "She lied. She wanted me gone and disgraced, so she accused you of stealing jewelry, and you ran instead of facing trial. Doesn't look good, Miss Moore. Looks exactly like guilt." Caleb had gone very still. "Evelyn?" "I didn't steal anything," she said desperately. "Her husband tried to force himself on me. When I fought back, when I tried to tell her, she called me a liar and a thief, said she'd have me arrested if I didn't leave quietly. So I left." "Quite the story," Reed said. "Convenient that there's no way to verify it. But I bet Judge Morrison would be very interested to hear about it, along with your other little secrets." "What other secrets?" Reed's smile widened. "All in good time. For now, I'll just say this. You have until the end of the week to leave. Pack up, disappear back to whatever hole you crawled out of. Do that and I'll forget everything I learned about Richmond. And if I don't, then I make sure that warrant finds you, and I make sure everyone knows that Caleb Hart's been harboring a fugitive thief, that he's put his children in danger by allowing a criminal into his home. Judge Morrison will have those children in protective custody before the ink dries." "You bastard," Caleb breathed. "I'm a businessman protecting my interests. Miss Moore leaves, you lose your stability, you default on the loan, and I get the property I should have had months ago. Everyone wins except you." Reed mounted his horse smoothly. "End of the week, Miss Moore. That's generous, considering." They rode off, leaving dust and devastation in their wake. Evelyn stood frozen, her carefully constructed new life crumbling around her. She'd thought she'd left Richmond behind, thought she'd buried that shame deep enough that it couldn't follow. But of course it had. Shame always followed. "Evelyn," Caleb's voice was careful, controlled. "Tell me the truth. All of it." She wanted to run. Every instinct screamed at her to pack her pathetic bag and disappear before dawn, save herself the humiliation of being thrown out. But she'd promised these children honesty, and that meant facing this no matter how much it hurt. "I worked for the Ashford family in Richmond," she said, her voice dead. "The husband, Marcus Ashford, he started watching me, following me, making comments. I tried to avoid him, tried to stay out of his way, but..." She stopped, swallowed hard. "One night he cornered me in the pantry, he put his hands on me, started tearing at my dress. I fought him, scratched his face, broke a lamp over his head, ran. And his wife blamed you, Caleb said. Called me a seductress. Said I'd tempted him, then made up lies when he rejected me. Then she claimed her jewelry was missing, a diamond brooch, some earrings. Said I must have stolen them as revenge. I didn't..." Evelyn's voice cracked. "I never touched her jewelry, but she had me over a barrel. Either I left quietly and she'd forget the theft accusation, or she'd have me arrested and make sure I hanged for it." "So you ran?" "Yes, like a coward, like someone with no other choice," Caleb interrupted. "Like someone who understood the word of a rich woman would always outweigh the truth from poor help." Evelyn looked at him, surprised. "You think I don't know how the world works?" Caleb asked, something bitter in his voice. "You think I don't know that people like Reed and the Ashfords can destroy people like us just because they can? Then you understand why I have to leave. If I stay, he'll make good on his threats. You'll lose the children." "No." "Caleb, no," he said again, stronger now. "I've lost enough. I won't lose you too." The words hung between them, raw and honest and terrifying in their implications. "You don't understand what he can do," Evelyn said desperately. "I understand exactly what he can do, but I also understand that you didn't steal anything, didn't do anything wrong except survive. And I'm not going to let him weaponize that against us. How are you going to stop him? He's got money, power, connections. And we've got truth, we've got community, we've got..." Caleb stopped, something crystallizing in his expression. "We've got Eleanor." "What?" "Eleanor kept journals. Every day for 15 years she wrote everything down. Every conversation, every event, every suspicion, including..." His eyes went distant, remembering. "Including her suspicions about Reed, about the fire at the Johnson Ranch, the accident that killed Tom Wilson, the way people who crossed him always seemed to meet bad luck." Hope flared in Evelyn's chest. "You think she wrote something we can use?" "I think if anyone could see through Reed's mask, it was Eleanor, and I think she'd have documented everything." He was already moving toward the house. "The journals are in my bedroom. I couldn't bear to read them after she died, but..." He stopped mid-sentence, and Evelyn heard it too, a soft sound from inside the house. They'd woken the children. Sarah stood in the hallway, Thomas and Ruth behind her, their faces pale in the lamplight. "Is Miss Moore leaving?" Sarah asked, her voice very small. Evelyn's heart shattered. "Sarah..." "Because if she is, I'm going with her." The words hung in the air, shocking in their fierceness. "Sarah, you can't..." Caleb started. "Why not? Everyone else leaves. Everyone else gives up. If Miss Moore's going to leave too, then I'd rather go with her than stay here and wait for the next person to quit on us." "I'm not quitting," Evelyn said. "I'm trying to protect you." "By leaving? That's not protection. That's abandonment. You promised..." Sarah's voice broke. "You promised you'd tell us if you were going to leave. You promised." And there it was. The weight of promises made to children who'd been broken by broken promises before. Evelyn knelt down, bringing herself eye level with Sarah. "You're right, I did promise, and I'm not leaving. Not unless your father tells me I have to go." "I'm not telling you to go," Caleb said immediately. "I'm telling you to stay and fight. Even if it costs you everything?" "Even then." He looked at his children, then back at Evelyn. "Because they're right. You promised, and so did I. I promised I'd do better, be better, give them stability. Sending you away because some bastard's threatening us? That's not better. That's surrender." Thomas had pushed forward, and now he tugged on Evelyn's sleeve. When she looked at him, he held out Blue the rabbit. "For courage," he whispered. "He helps me be brave." Evelyn took the worn stuffed animal with shaking hands, undone by the small boy's faith. Thank you, Thomas. Ruth climbed into her lap, and Sarah pressed close, and Caleb's hand landed on her shoulder, and suddenly Evelyn was surrounded by this broken, healing family who'd chosen her despite everything. All right, she said, her voice thick with tears. We fight, but we fight smart. If Eleanor's journals have evidence, then we use it, Caleb finished. We expose Reed for what he is before he can destroy us. It was a desperate plan built on hope and desperation. But looking at the children's faces, at Caleb's fierce determination, Evelyn thought maybe desperate hope was enough. At least for now. At least for tonight. Tomorrow would bring new battles. But they'd face them together. They spent what remained of the night in Eleanor's bedroom, a space Caleb hadn't entered since the day of her funeral. The door creaked open with reluctance, as if the room itself resisted being disturbed. Moonlight filtered through lace curtains Eleanor had sewn herself, illuminating furniture arranged exactly as she'd left it. Hairbrush on the vanity, slippers beside the bed, a shawl draped over the rocking chair where she'd nursed 3 babies and hummed lullabies that still echoed in the walls. Caleb stood frozen in the doorway, his breath coming shallow and quick. Sarah took his hand, and that small gesture seemed to break the spell. He crossed to the wardrobe with deliberate steps, pulling open the bottom drawer. Inside lay a stack of leather-bound journals, each one labeled with a year in Eleanor's precise script. 15 volumes spanning their marriage, their children's births, the building of this ranch, and this life. The last volume sat on top, dated 1877 to 1878. It ended in February, 3 weeks before her death. She wrote every night before bed, Caleb said quietly, lifting the journals with reverent care. No matter how tired she was, no matter what had happened that day, she said someday the children would want to know their history, and she wasn't going to trust memory to get it right. He carried the stack to the kitchen table, Sarah following with a lamp, Thomas and Ruth hovering in the doorway like nervous sparrows. Evelyn started coffee, knowing dawn would come before they finished reading. Caleb opened the most recent journal with shaking hands. Eleanor's handwriting filled the pages, neat, purposeful, alive. Evelyn watched his face as he read, saw grief and love and recognition wash over him in waves. Here, he said suddenly, his finger marking a passage dated September 1877. Listen to this. Jonah Reed stopped by today while Caleb was in the north pasture. Said he was just being neighborly, but his eyes calculated everything. The new fence, the breeding stock, the well that never runs dry. He offered to buy our water rights outright, said he'd pay fair price. I told him they weren't for sale. He smiled like I'd made a joke and said everything's for sale eventually, just a matter of finding the right price or the right pressure. There was something in the way he said pressure that made my skin crawl. She knew, Sarah breathed. She knew what he was. Caleb flipped forward, scanning entries. October. Reed attended church for the first time in months, positioned himself near Judge Morrison, speaking quietly throughout the service. Morrison nodded at whatever Reed was saying. After, the judge mentioned in passing that ranch failures were becoming common, that perhaps some people weren't suited to frontier life. The comment felt aimed, though I can't prove why. He was laying groundwork, Evelyn said, understanding crystallizing, getting the judge comfortable with the idea that some ranchers couldn't make it, that foreclosure was sometimes necessary. November, Caleb continued. The Johnsons' barn burned last night. They lost everything, tools, feed, 2 horses. Marshall says it was an accident. A lantern tipped over. But Sarah Johnson swears they'd extinguished all lamps before bed. She's terrified, keeps saying someone's trying to drive them out. Reed offered to buy their property this morning. How did he even know about the fire so fast? They haven't accepted yet, but they're considering. They have nothing left to rebuild with. A chill ran through the kitchen. Sarah had gone pale. December, Caleb read. Tom Wilson confronted Reed at the general store today, accused him of buying up debts and calling them in early to force sales, said Reed was trying to corner the valley's water. Reed just smiled and said business was business. 3 days later, Tom's horse threw him on the road home from town, broke his neck. The marshal called it tragic luck, but Tom was the best horseman in the county. His widow Mary says the saddle cinch was cut nearly through, like someone wanted it to fail at speed. Did anyone investigate? Evelyn asked. The marshal looked at it, declared it an accident, but the marshal's brother works for Reed. Caleb's hands had started shaking. Eleanor didn't write it outright, but the implication was that Reed had Tom killed, Sarah finished, her voice very small. They read in silence for a while, the journal entries painting a picture of systematic intimidation and acquisition. Reed didn't just want land, he wanted control. Every ranch he acquired gave him more water rights, more political influence, more power to shape the valley's future. The Harts Ranch, with its superior well and strategic location, was the keystone. Control their water, and Reed would effectively control everyone downstream. January 1878, Caleb said. I'm frightened, not for myself, for Caleb and the children. Reed's been buying up notes from the bank, calling in debts early, forcing sales. He hasn't approached us directly, but I can see the pattern. We're next. I've started documenting everything, every strange occurrence, every convenient accident. If something happens to me, Caleb's voice broke completely. He couldn't read further, just pushed the journal toward Evelyn with shaking hands. She picked up where he'd left off. If something happens to me, I want there to be a record. I want Caleb to know that Reed is dangerous, that he needs to be careful. The children need protection. This ranch is their heritage, their future. I won't let one man's greed steal that from them. I've hidden copies of everything I know and The entry ended mid-sentence, the remaining pages blank. Eleanor had fallen ill a week later, her fever coming on fast and fierce. She'd never finished writing her warning. Copies, Sarah said urgently. She said she hid copies. Of what? Where? They tore through the remaining journals, searching for any mention of hidden documents. Thomas, who'd been quiet throughout, suddenly tugged on Evelyn's sleeve. Mama's special place, he whispered. She had a special place for important things. Everyone turned to stare at him. Where, sweetheart? Evelyn asked gently. Thomas bit his lip, trying to remember. The wall. The wall that sings. The wall that sings? Caleb looked baffled, but Sarah's face lit with recognition. The loose board in the pantry, it creaks when you step on it, makes a singing sound. Mama used to say it was the house talking. They rushed to the pantry, Sarah pointing to a floorboard near the back corner. Caleb pried it up carefully, and underneath, wrapped in oilcloth, lay a leather satchel. Inside were documents, deeds, loan papers, correspondence, and underneath those a thick folder of handwritten notes in Eleanor's careful script. She documented everything: dates, times, conversations, names of people who'd crossed Reed and subsequently suffered accidents or financial ruin, copies of suspicious debt transfers, a letter from a former business partner of Reed's in Denver warning that Reed had been investigated there for intimidation and possible arson, though nothing was ever proven. This is evidence, Evelyn said, her hands shaking as she sorted through pages. Real evidence of a pattern. But is it enough? Caleb asked. Reed's powerful. Judge Morrison's in his pocket. Without solid proof of an actual crime. We don't need to prove a crime, Evelyn interrupted, her mind working fast. We need to create enough doubt, enough suspicion, that Morrison can't rule in Reed's favor without looking complicit. If we can show this pattern to enough people, if we can make Reed's threats look like what they are, intimidation, then Morrison will have to be impartial or risk his own reputation. How do we do that? We have 5 days. Sarah had been reading one of Eleanor's notes, and now she looked up with fierce determination. We expose him, publicly, at the town meeting Friday night. That's Reed's meeting, Caleb said. He called it to discuss water rights and property development. It's his platform. Exactly, Sarah said, and she sounded so much like her mother in that moment that Caleb flinched. He won't expect us to challenge him there. He thinks we're cornered, desperate. He won't see us coming. Evelyn studied the young girl, seeing strategic brilliance beyond her years. Your mother taught you well. She taught me that bullies count on silence, make noise, and they don't know what to do. Sarah's chin came up. We make noise. The next 3 days passed in furious preparation. Evelyn and Sarah organized Eleanor's documentation into a coherent timeline, cross-referencing events with public records at the county office. Mrs. Patterson helped, using her social connections to gather testimonies from people who'd been hurt by Reed's business practices. Mr. Chen from the general store provided accounting ledgers showing suspicious debt transfers. A widow whose husband had died in a convenient accident agreed to speak publicly for the first time. Slowly, carefully, they built a case not of criminal proof, but of unmistakable pattern. Caleb worked the ranch with renewed purpose, making sure everything looked prosperous and well managed. If Reed was going to claim neglect, the physical evidence had to contradict him. He repaired fences, cleaned buildings, organized the barn. Thomas and Ruth helped, the children responding to their father's engagement with tentative joy. On the fourth day, Reed's lawyer arrived with foreclosure papers. "Mr. Hart, I'm instructed to inform you that your loan payment is now 4 days overdue. Per the contract terms, Mr. Reed is initiating foreclosure proceedings. You have 72 hours to vacate the premises." Caleb took the papers with steady hands. "We'll see about that." The lawyer's eyebrows rose. "I'm sorry?" "I said we'll see about that. The loan payment isn't due until end of business Friday. It's only Thursday morning. You're early." Mr. Reed interpreted "Gip up." Mr. Reed can interpret whatever he likes. The contract says end of month. That's tomorrow at 6 o'clock. We have time. The lawyer looked uncertain, clearly unprepared for resistance. Nevertheless, Mr. Reed wanted you to understand the seriousness. "Oh, we understand perfectly. You can tell Mr. Reed we'll see him at the town meeting tomorrow night. We have some things to discuss." After the lawyer left, Sarah turned to her father with worried eyes. "We still don't have the money." "No," Caleb admitted, "but we have something better. We have truth, and we have timing. If we can expose Reed before the foreclosure becomes final, maybe we can buy more time. Maybe we can find another lender willing to transfer the debt." "That's a lot of maybes," Evelyn said quietly. "It's all we have." Friday arrived with oppressive heat, the kind of weather that made tempers short and patience scarce, perfect conditions for confrontation. The town meeting was scheduled for 7 o'clock in the community hall. By 6:30, the building was packed, every seat filled and people standing along the walls. Reed sat at the front table with Judge Morrison, looking relaxed and confident. He'd orchestrated this meeting to push through new water regulations that would benefit his consolidated holdings. He expected easy victory. He didn't expect the Hart family to walk in together. Evelyn saw his face change when Caleb entered with Sarah, Thomas, and Ruth, followed by Mrs. Patterson and a dozen other community members. Surprise flickered across Reed's features, quickly masked by his usual smooth composure. "Hart," he said pleasantly. "Didn't expect to see you here. Thought you'd be busy packing." "Meeting doesn't start until 7, Caleb replied evenly. "We have time." Judge Morrison banged his gavel, calling the room to order. He was a heavy-set man in his 60s, with the perpetually irritated expression of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. "Let's keep this brief. Mr. Reed has proposed new regulations regarding valley water rights and usage. Mr. Reed, you have the floor." Reed stood, spreading maps across the table with practiced ease. "Gentlemen, ladies, we're here to discuss the future of our valley. As you know, water is our most precious resource. Current distribution is inefficient, outdated. I'm proposing a consolidated management system that would steal water from small ranchers and give it to you," Caleb interrupted. The room went silent. Judge Morrison's gavel came down hard. "Mr. Hart, you're out of order. Mr. Reed has the floor." "With respect, Your Honor, this concerns all of us. We should hear all perspectives before voting." Morrison looked annoyed but nodded reluctantly. "Fine. After Mr. Reed finishes his presentation, we'll open for comment, but you'll wait your turn." Reed's smile had gone tight. "As I was saying, consolidated management would ensure efficient distribution during drought years. Those with superior water access would share resources for fair compensation, naturally. This benefits everyone." "Everyone except the people you're stealing from," someone called from the back. Reed's composure cracked slightly. "I'm not stealing anything. I'm proposing legal, regulated resource sharing." "Under your control," Caleb said. "With you determining who gets water and who doesn't. That's not sharing, that's monopoly." "Mr. Hart, you're interrupting again," Morrison warned. "Because he's lying, Your Honor, and I can prove it." That got everyone's attention. Reed's face had gone hard, dangerous. "You're making serious accusations, Hart. I hope you can back them up." I can. Caleb nodded to Sarah, who stood and began distributing copies of Eleanor's documentation to people throughout the room. My wife, before she died, documented a pattern of intimidation, suspicious accidents, and forced sales, all benefiting one man, all leading to consolidated water control under Jonah Reed's ownership. This is absurd, Reed said, but his voice had lost its smoothness. Your wife was ill, possibly confused toward the end. My wife was the sharpest woman I've ever known, Caleb cut in, his voice hard as iron, and she saw you for exactly what you are, a man who destroys anyone in his way. Judge Morrison was reading one of the documents Sarah had handed him, his expression shifting from annoyance to uncomfortable attention. These are serious claims, Mr. Reed. Based on circumstantial nonsense and the paranoid writings of a dying woman. Reed's mask was slipping, revealing the cruelty underneath. Eleanor Hart was sick. She wasn't thinking clearly. To use her confused notes as evidence of anything, she wasn't confused, Sarah said, her young voice cutting clear through the room. She was documenting crimes, and you know it's true because you're doing the same thing to us now. All eyes turned to the 10-year-old standing with her mother's courage. You bought our loan, Sarah continued. Then you tried to call it early. When that didn't work, you threatened to take us children away, said we were being neglected. You went to our church, talked to our neighbors, tried to isolate us. Just like you did to the Johnsons before their barn burned. Just like you did to Tom Wilson before his saddle broke. You follow the same pattern every time because it works, and nobody stops you. Your Honor, Reed said tightly, I'm not going to be lectured by a child on business practices she couldn't possibly understand. She understands perfectly, Mrs. Patterson said, standing. As do we all, now that we're seeing the whole picture. My husband and I have been in this valley 30 years. We've watched good families fail for no clear reason. We've watched properties change hands under suspicious circumstances. We've watched you accumulate power while everyone else struggles. And we've stayed quiet because what could we prove? What could we do against your money and influence? Other people began standing, voices rising in agreement. The widow whose husband died spoke up, her voice shaking but determined. My Tom's saddle was cut. The marshal said it was wear and tear, but I know my husband's equipment. It was sabotage. You offered to buy our ranch for half its value 3 days after the barn fire, Sarah Johnson added. Before we'd even stopped crying. What kind of neighbor does that? Reed's composure was fracturing, his face flushing with anger. These are lies, conspiracy theories from bitter people looking for someone to blame. Then explain this, Evelyn said quietly, stepping forward. She held up a letter, one of Eleanor's most damning finds. This is correspondence from your former business partner in Denver, warning the territorial authorities that you were under investigation for arson and intimidation. The investigation was dropped due to lack of evidence, but the pattern of behavior described matches exactly what's happening here. Judge Morrison held out his hand. Let me see that. Reed moved fast, crossing to the table and snatching the letter from Evelyn's hand before Morrison could take it. This is private correspondence, illegally obtained. It was sent to my wife as a warning, Caleb said, from someone who'd seen your methods before and wanted to help us. There's nothing illegal about it. Reed stared at the letter in his hand, at the room full of hostile faces, at his careful plans unraveling. Then his expression went cold and calculating. You want to play this game, Hart? Fine. Your loan payment was due end of business today. It's now 7:45. You're in default. Judge Morrison, I'm formally requesting immediate foreclosure and seizure of Hart property per the terms of our contract. Morrison looked uncomfortable. Mr. Reed, in light of these accusations, perhaps we should postpone. These accusations are meaningless without proof of actual crimes. What we have proof of is a debt that hasn't been paid. The law is clear, Your Honor. He's in default. I want what I'm owed. The room erupted in angry shouts. Morrison banged his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. Evelyn watched Caleb's face as hope drained away, replaced by the same defeated emptiness she'd seen that first day at the train station. They'd exposed Reed, but it wasn't enough. Without the money, the law was on his side. Then the door banged open. Everyone turned to see a small, elderly Chinese man enter, his traditional robes and long gray braid marking him as Mr. Chen's father, recently arrived from California. He moved with deliberate dignity to the front of the room, carrying a leather case. Excuse interruption, he said in careful English. I have information relevant to this matter. Who are you? Morrison demanded. I am Chen Wei Lin. I own General Store with my son. I also hold significant capital from successful business ventures in California. He opened the case, revealing neat stacks of bills. I understand Mr. Hart requires $300 to satisfy his debt. I would like to purchase this debt from Mr. Reed and extend new loan terms to Mr. Hart, terms that are fair and allow proper time for repayment. The room went silent. Reed's face had gone purple with rage. The debt isn't for sale, he said through clenched teeth. Everything is for sale, Chen Wei-lin said mildly, echoing Reed's own words back to him. You have said so yourself many times. I offer fair market value for the debt, plus 20% premium for your trouble. Cash, tonight. I don't want your money. I want the property. But you have no legal right to demand property over payment. If debt is satisfied, foreclosure is void. This is law, yes? He looked at Judge Morrison. I'm correct? Morrison nodded slowly, and something in his expression suggested relief. Yes. If the debt is paid or legitimately transferred to a new creditor, the foreclosure cannot proceed. Then I make this offer formally, in front of witnesses. Chen Wei-lin counted out bills with precise movements. $360, full payment of debt plus premium. Do you accept? Reed looked trapped, his eyes darting around the room full of hostile faces. If he refused a legitimate business offer in favor of foreclosure, he'd prove every accusation against him. But if he accepted, he'd lose his leverage. Why? He demanded. Why would you do this? Because Mr. Hart is a good man who has suffered enough. Because his wife Eleanor was kind to my son when he first came to this country, helped him learn English, treated him with respect when others did not. Because Chen Wei-lin's expression hardened. Because I have seen men like you before, Mr. Reed, men who believe power gives them right to destroy others. In my country, such men are called tyrants. Here you call them businessmen. But name does not change what you are. The old man's quiet dignity made Reed's bluster look petty and small. Evelyn could see the calculation happening behind Reed's eyes. Take the money and retreat, or refuse and prove himself the villain everyone now suspected. Finally, Reed snatched the bills from the table. Fine, the debt's transferred, but this isn't over, Hart. Not by a long way. Yes, it is, Judge Morrison said quietly. The judge had been reading Eleanor's documentation, and his face had gone grave. Mr. Reed, these allegations are serious enough to warrant territorial investigation. I'll be forwarding this material to the federal marshal for review. Until that investigation concludes, I suggest you conduct yourself very carefully. Reed's face went white. For the first time, Evelyn saw real fear in his eyes. You can't. You have no authority to. I have every authority to report suspected criminal activity to federal authorities. And I have a duty to ensure justice in my jurisdiction. A duty I seem to have been neglecting. Morrison's voice carried the weight of a man recognizing his own complicity. Meeting adjourned. Mr. Hart, your property is secure. Mr. Reed, I suggest you retain legal counsel. Reed stood frozen for a long moment, his empire crumbling around him. Then he turned and stalked from the room, his men scrambling to follow. The moment the door closed behind him, the room erupted in celebration. People surged toward the Hart family, offering congratulations and support. Caleb stood in the center of it all, looking dazed, like he couldn't quite process what had just happened. Sarah was crying and laughing at once. Thomas was actually smiling, and Ruth had attached herself to Evelyn's leg with fierce determination. Chen Wei-lin approached Caleb with quiet dignity. We will discuss loan terms tomorrow. For tonight, celebrate with your family. I don't know how to thank you, Caleb said, his voice breaking. You saved us. You saved everything. Your wife saved you, the old man corrected gently. Her words, her courage, her careful documentation. I merely provided means to honor her protection. She was a remarkable woman. You are fortunate to have had her love. I was. I am. Caleb's tears finally spilled over. And she'd be so angry that it took me this long to fight back. Perhaps. But she would be proud that you fought at all. Chen Wei-lin smiled. Now go. Hold your children. Remember what you are fighting for. The walk home happened in a blur of exhausted celebration. The children chattered excitedly, still running on the adrenaline of victory. Mrs. Patterson and several others accompanied them part of the way, making plans to help rebuild what months of grief had broken. Finally, they reached the ranch, and it was just the five of them again: Caleb, the children, and Evelyn. The house waited with its lamps unlit, patient and familiar. "We should celebrate," Sarah said. "Mama would make cake for special occasions." "I could make cake," Evelyn offered. "No," Caleb said quietly. "Not tonight. Tonight we just—" His voice caught. "Tonight we just be together." They gathered in the main room, the children sprawled on the floor, exhaustion finally catching up with excitement. Caleb settled into Eleanor's rocking chair and Evelyn found herself beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. "I never thought," Caleb started, then stopped. "When you stepped off that train, I thought you were just another woman who'd quit within a week. I couldn't see. Couldn't see what? That you were exactly what we needed, what I needed." He turned to look at her, and his eyes held something that made Evelyn's breath catch. "You stayed when it was hard. You fought when it was dangerous. You chose us when you could have chosen safety." "I chose myself too," Evelyn said quietly. "I chose the person I wanted to be instead of the person fear was making me." "What person is that?" "Someone who matters. Someone who—" She stopped, surprised by her own honesty. "Someone who belongs somewhere." Caleb's hand found hers, his calloused fingers threading through hers with surprising gentleness. "You belong here, if you want to. Not as help, not as someone we hired, but as—" He struggled for words. "As family, as someone who's chosen us as much as we've chosen you." The children had gone quiet, watching with barely concealed hope. "I want that," Evelyn said, and felt the truth of it settle warm in her chest. "I want to stay. I want to be family." Sarah launched herself at Evelyn with enough force to nearly knock her over. Thomas followed, then Ruth, and suddenly Evelyn was buried in children, their joy tangible and overwhelming. Caleb's arms came around all of them, holding his family, his whole, complete, chosen family, together. Later, after the children had finally fallen asleep in various states of collapse throughout the house, Caleb and Evelyn sat on the porch watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "What happens now?" Evelyn asked. "Now we rebuild. We pay Chenwei Lin back honestly, work hard, make this ranch what Eleanor always wanted it to be. We raise these children right, give them the stability they deserve. He paused. We live. We actually live instead of just surviving. And Reed? Reed will face whatever investigation brings, but even if nothing legal comes of it, everyone knows what he is now. He's lost the most important thing, people's trust. He can't operate in the shadows anymore." They sat in comfortable silence, letting the peace of victory settle around them. Evelyn thought about the woman who'd stepped off the train weeks ago, desperate, afraid, expecting nothing. That woman felt like a stranger now. "Eleanor was lucky," Evelyn said quietly. "Why?" "Because she had you. Because she got to build something real, something lasting. Because she mattered enough that even after death, her love protected her family." Caleb's hand found hers again. "You matter too. You've mattered from the moment you decided to stay. And if you're willing, if you want—" He took a shaky breath. "I'd like you to stay forever, not as help, not as someone filling a space Eleanor left, but as yourself. As Evelyn, who chose us when no one else would." Evelyn's heart hammered against her ribs. "What are you asking?" "I'm asking if, maybe, someday when enough time has passed and it feels right, if you might consider—" He couldn't finish, but his meaning was clear. "Ask me again when we're not exhausted and overwrought," Evelyn said gently. "When you've had time to grieve properly, and I've had time to prove I'm not going anywhere. Ask me when the children have healed more, when we've had time to be a family without crisis forcing us together." "But you're not saying no?" "I'm saying not yet, but also not never." She squeezed his hand. "I'm saying let's see who we are when we're not just surviving. Let's see if what we're building is strong enough to last. Caleb nodded, and if he was disappointed, it was tempered by understanding. That's fair. Eleanor would say that's wise. Your wife was a wise woman. She was, and she'd like you very much. He smiled, small but genuine. She'd probably tell me I was an idiot for not asking sooner, but she'd also tell me to be patient and let things develop naturally. Then let's honor her wisdom. We'll take our time. We'll do this right. They sat together until the stars filled the sky completely, and somewhere in the darkness, Evelyn felt the last of her fear dissolve. She'd found what she'd been looking for without knowing she was looking, a place to belong, people who saw her, a future that felt possible instead of terrifying. It wasn't perfect. There would be hard days ahead, grief to process, wounds to heal, a ranch to rebuild, and debts to repay. But they'd face it together, this strange assembled family bound by choice rather than blood. And somehow, that made it stronger than anything else could have been. The investigation into Jonah Reed's business practices began the following week when a federal marshal arrived from the territorial capital. He was a lean man in his 50s named Jacob Stone, with eyes that missed nothing and a reputation for integrity that even Reed's money couldn't bend. He set up operations in Judge Morrison's chambers and started interviewing witnesses. Evelyn watched from the general store as people filed in and out of the courthouse, each one carrying their piece of Reed's pattern of destruction. The widow whose husband died in the suspicious riding accident, the Johnsons, whose barn had burned, a dozen other families who'd lost property or livelihood under circumstances that seemed convenient only for Reed. "He's finished," Mr. Chen said quietly, restocking shelves beside her. "Even if the law cannot prove everything, the community knows, and a man without community trust has no power here. He still has money. Money without respect is just paper. You will see." Chen was right. Within days, Reed's empire began crumbling. Business partners quietly severed ties. The bank board requested his resignation. People who'd feared him for years suddenly found courage in numbers, and the whispers became accusations, became testimony. But it was Eleanor's documentation that proved most damaging. Her careful records, cross-referenced with public documents and witness statements, painted an undeniable picture of systematic intimidation. The marshal couldn't prove murder or arson in court. The evidence was too old, too circumstantial. But he could prove fraud, debt manipulation, and conspiracy to defraud. Reed was arrested on a Tuesday morning, led from his grand house in Irons while half the town watched in silence. Sarah had wanted to attend, to see the man who'd threatened her family brought low. But Caleb kept the children home, working the ranch like it was just another day. "Revenge is empty," he told Sarah when she protested. "Your mother taught me that. She'd want us focused on building, not watching someone else fall. But he tried to destroy us. And he failed. We're still here, still standing, still together. That's victory enough." They were in the north pasture mending fence when Marshal Stone rode out to the ranch 3 days later. Caleb straightened from his work, tension visible in his shoulders despite Reed's arrest. "Mr. Hart," Stone said, dismounting, "thought you'd want to know. Reed's lawyer worked out a deal. He's pleading guilty to fraud and debt manipulation in exchange for avoiding trial on the more serious allegations. He'll serve 5 years territorial prison and forfeit all properties acquired through fraudulent means." "What does that mean for the families he hurt?" "Means the territorial court will oversee redistribution of assets. Properties he took will be returned to original owners where possible, sold at fair market value where not. The proceeds go to victims first, then creditors. It'll take months to sort out, but justice will be done eventually." Caleb nodded slowly. "And the things that can't be proven? The deaths, the fires? Those stay unsolved officially, but..." Stone's expression hardened. "Everyone knows. And where he's going, his fellow prisoners will know too. Men don't treat kindly to those who hurt women and children, even in prison. He'll have his own justice there, I expect." After the marshal left, Caleb stood staring at the horizon for a long moment. Sarah came up beside him, slipping her hand into his. "Is it really over?" she asked. "The legal part is. The healing part, that takes longer." He squeezed her hand. "But we've got time now. That's the gift your mother gave us. Time to heal properly. The ranch settled into rhythms that felt almost normal as spring turned toward summer. Caleb worked alongside hired hands he could finally afford to pay properly, rebuilding what months of grief and crisis had broken down. The children flourished under routine and stability. Thomas's vocabulary expanded daily, Ruth's nightmares became rare instead of constant, and Sarah slowly allowed herself to be 10 years old instead of a miniature adult. Evelyn found herself becoming indispensable in ways that had nothing to do with cooking and cleaning. She managed the household accounts with the same efficiency she'd brought to everything else, caught up the children's schooling that had lapsed during the worst months, and slowly transformed the house from a mausoleum of grief into a home that honored Eleanor's memory while embracing present life. The quilt became their shared project. Sarah worked on it most evenings, with Evelyn guiding her through techniques Eleanor had started teaching. Each stitch was an act of remembrance and healing both, the pattern emerging slowly from careful, patient work. "Mother would say I'm getting better," Sarah said one evening, examining her stitching critically, "but she'd also find 3 things to correct." "That's because she wanted you to be your best," Evelyn replied. "Not perfect, just your best." "Do you think she'd be proud of of everything?" Evelyn set down her own sewing and looked at the girl honestly. "I think she'd be proud that you survived, that you fought, that you're still here, still trying, still becoming who you're meant to be. Everything else is just details." Sarah nodded, blinking back tears that came easier now that she'd learned crying didn't mean weakness. "I miss her. It doesn't hurt as much as it did, but I still miss her every day." "That won't change. You just learn to carry it differently. The missing becomes part of who you are instead of something that crushes you." "Is that what happened with your mother?" "Eventually. It took years, but yes. I learned that loving someone doesn't end when they die. You just love them differently." They worked in companionable silence until Thomas wandered in with Blue, ready for his bedtime story. Ruth followed, trailing her worn doll. These evening rituals had become sacred, the children gathering close, Evelyn reading from whatever book they'd chosen, Caleb listening from the doorway with an expression that suggested he was memorizing these moments against future need. One evening in late June, after the children were asleep and the house had settled into its nighttime creaking, Caleb found Evelyn on the porch, working on mending by lamplight. "You don't have to do that," he said. "We can afford to replace worn things now." "I know, but there's satisfaction in making old things useful again. Seems wasteful to discard what can be repaired." He sat beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth in the cooling night air. They'd developed an ease with each other over the months, a companionship that felt both comfortable and charged with possibility. "I've been thinking about what you said," Caleb began, "about waiting until we weren't just surviving, about seeing who we are when crisis isn't forcing us together." Evelyn's hand stilled on the mending. And I think we've had enough time now. Enough normal days, enough ordinary moments, enough to know that what's between us isn't just trauma bonding or desperation." He took a breath. "I'm still in love with Eleanor. I don't think that ever completely goes away." The words should have hurt, but Evelyn found she understood completely. "I wouldn't want it to. She's part of who you are, part of this family's foundation. But I'm also—" He stopped, searching for words. "I'm also falling in love with you. Different than Eleanor because you're a different person, but just as real, just as deep. And I don't want to wait anymore to say it out loud." Evelyn set down her mending with careful precision, buying time to let his words settle. The children adore you. They already think of you as family. Sarah asked me last week when you and I were going to get married, like it's a foregone conclusion." Despite the seriousness of the moment, Evelyn laughed. "She did?" "Said it was obvious we love each other, and she didn't understand what we were waiting for." Thomas agreed. Even Ruth said, and I quote, "Miss Evelyn should stay forever and be our real mama." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "She said that?" "She did. They've already chosen you, Evelyn. They chose you the day you arrived and kept choosing you every day since. Now I'm asking, will you choose us back? Will you marry me and make this family official?" The question hung in the air between them, enormous and terrifying and exactly right. Evelyn thought about the woman who'd stepped off the train months ago, convinced she was too little, too plain, too nothing to matter. That woman felt like a stranger now. "I'm not Eleanor," she said quietly. "I'll never be her, never replace what you had. I'm not asking you to be Eleanor, I'm asking you to be Evelyn, to be exactly who you are, fierce and loyal and stubborn and brave, to be the woman who stayed when everyone else left, who fought when fighting seemed hopeless, who chose broken people and helped them become whole again. I'm just as broken as the rest of you. I know, and we're choosing you anyway, all of us, together. We're choosing the family we make instead of mourning the one we lost." He reached for her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers. "So what do you say? Will you marry me?" Evelyn looked at this man who'd learned to grieve and love simultaneously, who'd fought for his children with everything he had, who'd chosen to see her worth when the world insisted she had none. She thought about the children sleeping inside, already calling her name in their dreams. She thought about the life they were building together, imperfect and precious and real. "Yes," she said, and felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. "Yes, I'll marry you." Caleb's smile transformed his face, erasing years of grief in an instant. He pulled her close and kissed her with a tenderness that spoke of new beginnings rather than desperate endings. When they broke apart, both were crying and laughing at once. "The children are going to be insufferable," Evelyn said. "Sarah will say she knew all along. Thomas will want to help plan everything, and Ruth will probably insist on wearing her fanciest dress daily until the wedding. Let them be insufferable. They've earned it." Caleb kissed her forehead. "When should we do this? I don't want a long engagement. I've wasted enough time already." "Let's ask the children. It's their family too. They should have a say." They told the children the next morning at breakfast, though Sarah's smug expression suggested she'd been listening from the hallway the night before. Thomas whooped with joy. Ruth clapped her hands and demanded to know if she could call Evelyn Mama now, and Sarah just smiled with the satisfied air of someone whose plans had come together perfectly. "I knew you'd say yes," Sarah said. "I told Thomas you would." "Did you now?" Evelyn tried to sound stern, but her smile ruined the effect. "You love each other, it's obvious, and you love us, which means you're staying forever, which means you have to get married because that's what people who love each other do." Sarah's logic was bulletproof in its 10-year-old certainty. "When's the wedding?" Thomas asked. "Can it be soon? Can we invite everyone? Can we have cake?" "We can have cake," Caleb assured him, "but we should probably ask Evelyn about the rest." All eyes turned to her, hopeful and expectant. Evelyn looked at these children who'd chosen her as much as she'd chosen them, at the man who'd learned to love again despite grief, at the life they were building together from the ashes of tragedy. "August," she said, "late August, when the weather's good and we've had time to prepare properly. We'll invite the whole town, everyone who stood with us against Reed, everyone who's become family. We'll do it right, with respect for Eleanor's memory and hope for our future both." "Can we finish Mother's quilt by then?" Sarah asked. "Can I carry it at the wedding, like carrying her with us?" Evelyn's throat tightened. "That would be perfect, sweetheart. She'd love that." The next 2 months passed in a blur of preparation and normal life intertwined. The ranch thrived under Caleb's renewed attention. Crops came in strong. The breeding stock produced healthy calves. Chenway Lynn's loan was paid down steadily, with terms generous enough that they never felt crushed by debt. Mrs. Patterson took charge of wedding preparations with the enthusiasm of a woman who'd been waiting months for this announcement. She organized the church ladies, planned the reception, and somehow kept the whole thing from becoming overwhelming. "Your mother would have wanted this done properly," she told Evelyn during a fitting for her wedding dress, a simple but elegant creation that the church ladies had sewn together from fabric Eleanor had saved for special occasions. "She'd have wanted you to feel beautiful, to know you're valued and celebrated." "You didn't know my mother," Evelyn said softly. "No, but I knew Eleanor. And she wrote in her journals about wanting Caleb to find happiness again someday, about hoping her children would have a mother who loved them properly. You're the answer to prayers she said before dying. That makes you precious to us all." The dress fit perfectly, and when Evelyn saw herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Not because she looked different, but because she looked like she belonged, like she mattered, like she was exactly enough. Sarah made progress on the quilt with determined focus, her stitches growing more confident as the pattern emerged. It was beautiful, a star pattern in blues and creams that Eleanor had designed specifically for her daughter. Each block represented a lesson Eleanor had wanted to teach, a memory she'd wanted to preserve. Sarah worked on it every evening, and slowly, the act of creation became its own form of healing. "I think she knew," Sarah said one night, holding up a nearly complete section. "I think Mother knew she might not have much time, and she wanted to leave us something we could finish together, something that would teach us we could create beautiful things even after she was gone." "She was a wise woman," Evelyn said, her voice thick with emotion. "And you're becoming just like her." "Really?" "Really. You're strong and brave and fiercely protective of the people you love. You face hard truths instead of hiding from them. You're exactly who she hoped you'd become." Sarah set down the quilt and threw her arms around Evelyn. "I'm so glad you came. I'm so glad you stayed." "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." The week before the wedding, Marshal Stone returned with final news about Reed's case. Reed had been sentenced to 7 years after additional fraud charges were filed. His property had been liquidated, with proceeds distributed to victims. The valley's water rights had been reorganized under community oversight, ensuring no single person could ever monopolize resources again. "It's done," Stone told Caleb on the front porch. "He's gone, and the systems that let him operate have been dismantled. You're safe now. Your family's safe." After the marshal left, Caleb stood staring at the land stretching before him. The ranch he and Eleanor had built, that he'd nearly lost, that was now secured for his children's future. Evelyn came up beside him, and he pulled her close. "She saved us," he said quietly. "Even after death, Eleanor protected us. Her journals, her documentation, her refusal to stay silent, that's what stopped him. And you honored her protection by fighting back, by refusing to surrender. We fought back, you, me, the children, the community, all of us together." He kissed her temple. "I used to think love meant holding on to the past, but Eleanor taught me, through her journals, through her final act of protection, that love means choosing the future, choosing life, choosing to be happy again. She'd want that for you, for all of us. I know, and I'm finally ready to accept it." The wedding day arrived with perfect late summer weather, warm but not oppressive, with a breeze that carried the scent of harvest and new beginnings. The church was packed, every pew filled with people who'd watched this family's journey from grief to healing. Sarah, Thomas, and Ruth stood at the front in their carefully chosen outfits, each one holding a piece of the completed quilt that they'd carry during the ceremony. Sarah had designed the ritual herself. As Evelyn walked down the aisle, the children would unfold the quilt behind her like a train, carrying Eleanor's blessing into this new chapter. Caleb waited at the altar in his best suit, his eyes bright with tears and joy combined. Beside him stood Mr. Chen serving as witness, and Mrs. Patterson, who'd insisted on officiating since the regular minister was visiting family in Denver. The music began. Not a traditional wedding march, but an old hymn Eleanor used to sing, chosen by Sarah because it felt right. Evelyn appeared at the back of the church, and the congregation rose as one. She walked slowly, giving the children time to manage the quilt. Behind her, the fabric unfurled in a river of blues and creams, Eleanor's handiwork literally supporting each step toward this new future. When she reached the altar, the children arranged the quilt around her and Caleb both, wrapping them together in Eleanor's final gift. "We gather today," Mrs. Patterson began, her voice carrying to every corner, "to witness the joining of two people who've walked through fire and emerged stronger. Caleb Hart and Evelyn Moore come to this moment carrying grief and hope equally, honoring the past while embracing the future." She spoke about Eleanor's love, about how true love wants happiness for those left behind rather than endless mourning. She spoke about the courage it takes to choose life after loss, to open your heart again when it's been broken. She spoke about family being something you build through choice and commitment rather than just blood and biology. Then she turned to the children. "Sarah, Thomas, Ruth, do you accept Evelyn as your mother, your family, your permanent home?" "Yes," they chorused, loud and certain. "And Evelyn, Do you accept these children as your own, to love and guide and protect for the rest of your days? I do, Evelyn said, her voice breaking with emotion. With everything I have, I do. Caleb, do you take Evelyn as your wife, your partner, your equal in all things? I do. Gladly, gratefully, completely. Evelyn, do you take Caleb as your husband, accepting both his love and the family he brings? I do. Mrs. Patterson smiled through her own tears. Then by the power vested in me by this community that's witnessed your journey, I pronounce you husband and wife, and pronounce this family complete and whole. Caleb, you may kiss your bride. He did, gentle and reverent, while the congregation erupted in applause. The children wrapped themselves around both adults, and suddenly it was a family embrace rather than just a wedding kiss, messy and perfect, and exactly right. The reception filled the community hall with food, music, and celebration. People who'd stood with them against Reed came to offer blessings and joy. Chen Wei Lin presented them with a ledger showing their debt completely forgiven as his wedding gift. Mrs. Patterson cried through 3 handkerchiefs and blamed it on allergies despite the obvious lie. Sarah danced with her father, then with Thomas, then with Evelyn, her face glowing with happiness that had seemed impossible months ago. Thomas talked to anyone who'd listen about his new family, his words tumbling over each other in excitement. Ruth fell asleep in Evelyn's arms halfway through the evening, content and secure. As the sun set and lanterns were lit, Caleb pulled Evelyn onto the floor for a slow dance. Around them, the community swayed to music that spoke of home and belonging. "Are you happy?" he asked quietly. "More than I knew how to be," Evelyn admitted. "I spent so long thinking I wasn't enough for anyone, that I was too plain, too poor, too nothing to deserve good things. And now you're exactly enough. You always were. You just needed people who could see it. I needed you, all of you, this family, this community, this life." She rested her head against his shoulder. "I was so lost when I stepped off that train. I had no idea I was actually coming home." "Neither did I. I thought I was just hiring help. I didn't know I was meeting my future." They danced in comfortable silence, surrounded by people who'd become family, building a life neither had expected but both desperately needed. Later, much later, after the celebration wound down and they'd returned to the ranch house glowing with lamplight, Evelyn found herself in the room that had been hers but was now theirs. The children were asleep in their beds. The house was quiet, and the world felt impossibly peaceful. She stood at the window looking out at land that stretched toward distant mountains, thinking about the journey that had brought her here, the shame she'd carried from Richmond, the fear that had driven her west, the desperate hope that had made her stay when every instinct screamed to run. Caleb came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you thinking?" "That 6 months ago, I was nobody. I was running from a past I couldn't escape, convinced I'd never matter to anyone. And now..." She turned in his arms to face him. "Now I'm someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's family. I matter." "You always mattered. The world just failed to notice." "Maybe. Or maybe I needed to find the place where my particular kind of broken fit, where my scars matched someone else's, and together we could build something whole." She thought about Eleanor, about the woman she'd never met but felt she knew intimately through journals and children's stories, and the love that still echoed in every corner of this house. Eleanor, who'd documented evil so it could be fought, who'd planned for a future she wouldn't see, who'd loved so fiercely that it transcended death itself. "Thank you," Evelyn whispered, not to Caleb, but to the ghost that lived in these walls. "Thank you for protecting them. Thank you for your blessing. Thank you for loving them enough to want them happy, even if it meant someone else standing where you should be." No answer came, but Evelyn felt it anyway, a warmth, an acceptance, a passing of something precious from one woman's hands to another's. The burden of care, the joy of loving these particular people, the responsibility of carrying forward what Eleanor had started. She could do this. She was doing this. She was exactly the right person for this particular family, not because she was perfect, but because she'd chosen them when choosing was hard. Because she'd stayed when staying was dangerous. because she loved them with the fierce protectiveness of someone who knew what it meant to have nothing and everything simultaneously. The future stretched before them, uncertain and full of possibility. There would be hard days ahead. Grief didn't disappear on a schedule. Children still needed raising. Ranches still required endless work. But they'd face it together, this family built from loss and choice and stubborn hope. And that, Evelyn thought as Caleb led her toward the bed they'd now share, was more than enough. More than she'd ever dared to dream when she'd stepped off that train in a dying town with nothing but desperation and a threadbare dress. She wasn't the woman nobody wanted anymore. She was the woman who stayed, the woman who fought, the woman who loved and was loved in return. She was exactly enough. And finally, beautifully, impossibly, she was home. The years that followed would bring their own challenges and joys. Ruth would grow from a frightened 3-year-old into a confident young woman with her mother Eleanor's compassion and Evelyn's fierce determination. Thomas would find his voice fully, becoming known throughout the valley for his kindness and his skill with horses. Sarah would finish not just Eleanor's quilt, but a dozen more, each one a masterpiece that carried forward her mother's legacy of creating beauty from ordinary materials. Caleb and Evelyn would have children of their own eventually, 2 sons who'd grow up knowing they had 2 mothers, one in memory and one in flesh, both essential to who they were. The ranch would prosper, becoming known for fair dealing and quality stock, a testament to what happened when people chose integrity over greed. The community would remember the summer Jonah Reed fell and the Hart family rose from ashes. They'd remember it as a lesson about the power of choosing to stand together, about refusing to let fear and intimidation win. But that was all still to come. For now, there was just this moment, a family sleeping peacefully under one roof, a woman who'd found her worth, a man who'd learned to love again, and children who understood that loss didn't have to be permanent, that healing was possible, that choosing each other was sometimes the bravest thing you could do. In the morning, they'd wake to ordinary ranch work and the endless demands of daily life. But tonight, they were simply complete, simply home, simply enough. And in the quiet darkness, if you listened carefully, you might hear the echo of Eleanor's laughter, joyful, approving, free. Her family was safe, her children were loved, her husband had found happiness again. Her last act of protection had worked, and that, after everything, was all any mother could ask.